Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, the 26th of January, 2022. Welcome to the Beverly School Committee Standing Committee on Finance and Facilities. We are meeting this evening in a hybrid model using a remote meeting application, provided at no cost to our district with captioning, allowing for remote participation and for public access to the open portions of the meeting. We're also recording tonight and being broadcast and streamed by BevCam. Thank you, Kim and BevCam. On June 16th, 2021, the governor signed Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Amongst other things, this bill allows public bodies to continue to hold meetings remotely until April 1st, 2022. This specifically suspends the need for a quorum and the chair to be physically present and asks our body to use technical methods to allow safe public access to our meeting. We would encourage viewers to utilize BevCam streaming options this evening if possible. As a note, Beverly has prior approval for remote participation through the chair, although the chair and a quorum will be physically present this evening. We still have the ability to have remote participation even after this act expires. Tonight is F&F, Finance and Facilities, and that means we do not have an agenda item for addressing the body during our meeting. Joining us today are members of the citizen representatives to the F&F subcommittee, school committee members, and various members of the district administration leadership team. I'll conduct a full roll call attendance in a minute for our records, since sometimes the application does not always display all the participants. Please remember that any audio or video that you supply on this platform will become part of this meeting record. As such, use your mute functionality to prevent background noises. Here we go with the roll call. As our citizen reps we have in attendance this evening, it's going to kind of mess me up because you have a name tag in front of you that's not your name.
Who am I tonight?
Mr. Paul Manzo.
Here.
Miss Lindsay Ducharme.
Here.
We have also our representative from the City Council, Councilor Todd Rotundo. Todd, can you unmute your mic and say here so BevCam knows they can hear you?
Here.
Thank you. We have on our school committee, on this committee, Kim Coelho.
Here.
And Dr. Kinan McKenzie.
Here.
And myself, Lauren DeVisnik. We have also in the room our recording secretary, Liz Curran. From our administrative team, we have Dr. Sue Chirocek.
Here.
And without microphones, but in kind of the back, we have Miss Erin Brown and Dr. Morgan. And online, all right, so I got to pull up my participant list. Online, we have Director of Transportation, Dana Krushank.
Here.
We have Director of Food Services, Christina Leal.
Here.
We have both online and in the room, School Committee Chair and our Zoom Coordinator, Rachel A. Bell.
Here, but not here.
And we have, most importantly for this meeting, our Director of Finance, Jean Sherburne, is remote this evening.
Here.
Fantastic. All right, so there's our roll. I think we're done with that. And we are going to jump into our agenda. Hopefully everybody can see the agenda on my screen. I can increase the font if need be. So the first order of business is approval of our meeting minutes from our last meeting on December 15th, 2021. I'm looking for a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Ducharme.
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho. Are there any comments or corrections? I'm looking at you, Mr. Orange Mask. I'm an editor for a living. All right, I see none. And I will say that of the people who are remote this evening, none of them are voting members. Therefore, we do not need to do a roll call vote. So for the people in the room, there's a motion on the table in a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Dr. McKenzie, are you thank you, abstaining. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 0, 1. It's like a soccer score. Okay, our next order of business is to review or talk about the B&G report. And I'd like to say, hopefully all of you received the B&G report. It came fairly late this afternoon. And I wish to apologize about that. But I also wish to ask our administration if we can relay the message, relay the message to the city that we really need that report in a more timely fashion for all of us to have time to review it, to be able to have a reasonable discussion here at our meetings. I would like, ideally, the report by Monday, wicked ideally by Friday so that we have our weekends, but certainly at least by Monday so that we can smush it into our evening activities Monday or Tuesday evening to be prepared to discuss on a Wednesday evening.
Yes, I agree, and I just want to make sure everyone knows no fault of Jean's. I think she was texting many times, so we'll work on that together. So
fantastic. All right, so that said, I don't know how much people were able to review that report, given its late arrival in your boxes. But does anybody have any questions for the school administration about the B&G report? Yes, Mr. Manzo.
Not so much a question, but one of my usual observations. There's a note at the end about how this work that's done by B&G is done in the shadows, and he wanted to make sure that people know that these things go on. And for someone who's been sitting at this table for a long time, it's one of the reasons why we ask for a buildings and grounds report, because we want to make sure that the public knows that regardless of what you think of our buildings, there are people working in them day and night to make sure that they're safe and clean and ready for business every day. And so that's why this group, your group, looks for this report every month to make sure that nothing's missed and that we know what's going on in these buildings. And so I just want to say thanks to the Buildings and Grounds crew and the people who make this work happen.
Thank you. That's very kind, as usual. You often have kind things to say, so thank you. I've put that note up on the screen so people can see what you're talking about, this paragraph here. This work is done in the shadows. Okay, so no comments on this. Going back to our agenda, the next item on the agenda is our update from our Director of Finance and Operations, and I am going to be scrolling for Miss Sherburne. Jean, it's to you. Maybe just let me know when you want to scroll.
Okay, thank you. So just a reminder that this is the Wednesday, January 26th meeting. And what the administration is planning on discussing tonight is the FY22 FTE reporting, the electric school bus, an update on that. Food service, Ms. Leal will talk about the USDA funding and the after-school snack program. I will be talking about the school choice revenue that change that has occurred for FY22. And then we have our financial reports. And I forgot to take off budget transfer. I do not have any budget transfers, but I do have a gifts to school that needs accepting. If you can go to the next slide. Each year, I look at the FTEs at the end of the school year, and then I look at the FTEs at the beginning of the next school year. During that time, you do know that there's some additional FTEs that have been approved just when we build the budget. So from FY21 to FY22, there was 24, believe it's 24.4 positions that were added through the budget process. What I'm bringing forth tonight is a report to let you know how many additional FTEs have occurred in our total count. So for, we have an additional 11 FTEs increased after the FY22 budget process. And all of these were funded either through ESSER or the SPED grant. So therefore, I didn't bring it forward as a vote to the committee to approve the 11, but I wanted to talk about what they are, and this would give me what my FTE count is now. And then if we're going to add anything from now to the end of the fiscal year, I would bring that to the committee for a vote. So we had 1.0 adjustment counselor added at the high school that was ESSER funded, a 1.0 ELL teacher at Cove, ESSER funded, 1.0 ELL director, which is district-wide, which is ESSER funded. That was actually had been discussed during the budget process, but it didn't get added to the budget, so therefore we'd have to add it after. 4.0 COVID positions at the middle school that are ESSER funded, and 2 of them are subs, so that they have 2 subs that are coming into the school every day, a permanent sub to cover for absences, and 2 hall monitors to help with the social distancing. We have 2.0 nurses at the district-wide level to help with the COVID, and that was ESSER funded. And we have 2.0 BCBAs at the district-wide, and one of those is grant funded with grant number 240, which is the special education IDEA grant. The other one was put into the budget with savings we had in tuitions. So that's all I have to talk about the FTEs. I don't necessarily think we need to have a vote on it, but if the committee felt they wanted to have a vote on the 11, because they were ESSER funded, I didn't bring them forward as a vote.
Dr. Trocek.
I just wanted to add, and Gina and I have been talking about this this is pretty much all we've done for the last couple of weeks, but I don't want you to think this is an exhaustive list of the positions that will look different. However, if you remember in FY21, a number of our positions were remote learning academy people. And so this is just sort of the delta of the sum number of positions that we have. So when I report later tonight, you're going to see a much larger list of positions that were created in response to the pandemic, but many of those positions replaced positions that were formerly in the RLA. So that's why this is an increase from just that number of whatever that full number of FTEs were at the end of FY21 to the number of FTEs at the beginning of FY22. So, Jean, did I explain that right?
Perfectly.
Thank you. So later in the evening when I'm doing my budget presentation, I'm going to give a little mid-cycle review as to what we've done with all of the funding and where we sit through FY22, and there'll be a much more exhaustive list of positions. So I didn't want that to confuse you with this list right here.
All right, so I have a question, but before I call on myself, I'm looking around the room to see if anybody has any questions for Dr. Trocek or Ms. Sherburne about this particular slide before we move on. Yes, Ms. Ducharme.
Thank you. So I think this is a topic that we talked about before, and I understand that the ESSER money parts of the ESSER money has to be spent or can only be spent on certain things, and the ESSER money will eventually go away. So I'm looking at some of those positions, and maybe the hall monitors to make sure that we're ensuring social distancing may not be, for example, a position that will be forever ongoing, but some of the other positions, like an adjustment counselor, may be something that we anticipate keeping on for a while. And so I just want to make sure I'm clear that we anticipate that positions like that we're using ESSER funding for are going to eventually be absorbed into the regular budget, right?
That's a great question. So actually, none of those decisions are finalized yet. I think, again, I have a larger presentation that's coming forward. And that particular question actually will be addressed next month as we do the balance between what positions are the ones that we would want to roll into appropriated, what positions. So for some of the positions that we created this year, a building administrator may have come to the conclusion, I don't need that position again next year. Like, I thought it was going to be a good idea. I thought it was going to address what we needed. I think that I have a better idea of a way to address, and I'd like to move in this direction. It's a balancing act. One of the things that we're trying to avoid is what happens when all of the funding goes away, right? And this cliff that the budget could fall off of. So it's really a balancing act, and we're doing a lot of work to say, all right, this many positions is on ESSER. We can move these into appropriated. These are targeting the ones, but we have this funding for 2 more years. So I think we have time, but that is one of the main things that we're doing. And we spend a lot of time weighing what are the, how are we measuring whether this position is as valuable and do we need it? What efficiencies can we create to maybe absorb it into the budget? But all of these are ongoing decisions and discussions as we go along. So, yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is that we do have ESSER 1 that will be ending at the end of this year, and then we have ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And when we built ESSER 2 and 3, we were keeping some of those things in mind, that we need them, like the adjustment counselor or the ELL director, for more than 1 year.
Well, just to
Mr.
follow up on
Manzo,
Lindsay's, sorry?
My microphone was muted. Yes, Mr. Manzo.
So to follow up on Lindsay's question, so if some of these positions become absorbed into the appropriated budget, do they then come before either this board or the school committee for approval?
Probably come through the budget process.
Through the budget process.
So, we have the budget process, and we always
Okay.
present what those new positions are. Thank you, sorry. It would have been, that, many of them, if we make a decision, say we make a decision on some of them now that, we might have the opportunity to move them in the appropriated budget this year, they would be incorporated in the budget process and absorbed that way. If the decision's made mid-year, then it would have to come forward, but most of them would be decisions that, because we're trying to build an appropriated budget with either level serviced or improvements that we determine we need, it would happen through the budget process.
But at some point, the school committee gets to say whether they approve these positions.
Yes, that approval would come that way. The same, typically, if we have enrollment increases or any of those other ways that we would come through when we come to the budget process, we would present, here are the new positions that we're proposing for FY24, and they would be on that list, and that's when the school committee would approve those.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
All right, again, I'm looking around the room before I call on myself. So the first part of my question was actually what Ms. Ducharme asked, and she and I were on a financial webinar earlier today, and she also asked a question there that was on my mind. So she's really inside of this curly head, and she's not sure who should be more worried about that. I think it's her. My next question is, I think not so much a question but a comment. I think that, to some extent, what inspired Mr. Manzo's question is a thought around the fact that we have money, and usually if we're going to spend money, we talk about it here, and the ESSER money, both on the city side is called something else, but for us, the ESSER money is being spent, and you're going to present that later. But that doesn't come in front of this committee. And so I understand you're going to talk about it at the next meeting, but can you spend a half a minute here saying maybe why or maybe not so much how, but why it is the case that the ESSER money doesn't go through the same process of coming to FNF for approval or to the committee of the whole for a budget process? That's not very well worded. I apologize.
So the committee does accept the grant and the grant amount.
Yep.
Right, but the committee is having really no say over how those monies are being spent, as opposed to having some amount of a say over how other monies are being spent. As Mr. Manzo said, if we added a position in the middle of the year, we would have to approve it here, and then the committee of the whole would have to approve it. If we roll one of those positions in or absorb it into an appropriated budget, then we have the committee as the whole has the ability to vote on that budget. So the spends of the ESSER money is in your hands and not ours. So I just wanted to know if you could speak to that for a minute, because I don't think that that's very publicly known.
So the grants are written and there are grant budgets in the grant, and maybe that's something as the grant budgets are approved when you accept the budget money in, but these positions are incorporated into those grants. I think this is a very unique situation as well because of the enormity of the amount of money that is being accepted in by the committee so whether it was a $2.1 million ESSER 2 grant or soon to be the $4.7 million ESSER 3 grant, then the work is built out of the plan. One place where you voted in many of these positions was when you approved the Student Opportunity Act plan that you approved probably January of 2020. So a number of those positions were actually in. So in there were a number of these positions that we're talking about. So they did come forward, but they came forward under a different umbrella because they were commitments for SOA, which is technically Chapter 70 money. If you remember, we anticipated getting about $700,000 in SOA money, so we put a plan together that approved about $700,000 worth of positions. We got $140,000 worth of SOA money. So what we did was we took the plan from SOA and the priorities that were developed and identified by the school committee in the budget process, and that's how we made the decisions around what individual positions would be included in the ESSER funding.
Thank you. So I think that from a transparency point of view, when people watch us at home, they don't see the same process happening, and so that was fantastic. I just wanted that to be a little blurb right there. All right. Unless anybody has anything else, Jean, I'm going to scroll.
Okay. The next discussion is going to be on the electric buses, and I think I can probably get through this, but if there's any questions, I'll ask Mr. Cruikshank to be available to answer any of the questions. So the first thing I have is just want to that you're aware that we do have electric buses, 2 electric buses in our fleet. The funding for these 2 buses is coming from funding under the City of Beverly's purview, not the school department. We're working with the city to increase the number of electric buses and decrease the amount of diesel buses. We released a bid number 21032 on November 15th through the city's purchasing department for 3 additional electric buses. Excuse me. On December 7th, the city received 2 bids. One of the bids was from who we purchased the first 2 buses from, another from another entity. The bids are for a 10-year lease period, which will need to go through City Council for approval because they're a 10-year lease. So anything over 4 years has to go through City Council. The lease that we're looking at would be would include a $1 buyout after 10 years. So we would actually own these buses. Where the first 2 buses that we have, there is no buyout. We lease them for a set period of time. It's either 5 or 10 years, I can't remember. And then the bus goes back to the company that owns it, or we talk about releasing that, et cetera. So that's a little bit different than this one. What I want to tell you here is currently we have $290,394 in our budget annually for equipment. We also pay for the bus right transportation software from this account, which has a cost of $29,250 annually. So therefore it leaves in our budget $261,144 available for equipment through purchasing and or leasing each year. We have one more annual payment in the amount of $124,232.40 for the last 7 buses that we leased. And that last payment will be made in FY23. The bid came in at the annual cost for the 3 electric buses would be $93,000 for each year for 10 years, beginning in FY23. So therefore, we have adequate funding available for these 3 additional electric buses. And I do have enough funding to secure 2 additional vans that will need to be replaced in FY23. So when we were talking about replacing as many as we could, we have to remember there's others that are going to be coming up, just like that one that's ending next year, that those buses are already going to be 5 years old. So what we would be purchasing would be 2 gasoline-powered vans that we would have hybrid conversion added. And Dana informed me that we currently have 10 hybrid vehicles, not including the 2 electric buses in the fleet right now. So I wanted to just bring a update to the school committee. I believe that the city council may be hearing that they're going to be getting a 10-year lease coming their way. So I wanted to make sure that the school committee was aware of what was going on, and we're on top with this. We're in agreement with this, that we can sustainably do this. We will have to look at if we can add beyond that, because remember, this 93,000 is going to come out of that 261 for 10 years.
Okay, and all right, I'm looking around the room. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Sherburne before I call on myself? So, Ms. Sherburne, because we already have this as a line item and we've already approved our budget, that's why we can choose to spend it on these buses without, quote unquote, voting. However, the city council needs to vote to let us do a 10-year lease.
Correct.
That's the only vote we're waiting on before we say, yes, giddy up, we're going to do this.
Correct.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm scrolling.
No other questions? Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Christina Leal to talk about the USDA funding and the after-school snack program.
Thank you and good evening. So we have some monies coming from USDA. So on January 7th, the USDA announced the adjustment to the reimbursement rate to help schools continue to serve children healthy and nutritious meals. So for each lunch served, we are now getting 25 cents additional. And for each breakfast served, we are getting 14 cents more. These funds come right into our reimbursement claim, and they are effective from January until June. I do believe they will continue through the summer months because they are considered the summer rate as well. And we are operational under the summer program because everything is free. So I do anticipate that they will be the same rates all summer long. All districts that diverted money towards our entitlements for DOD fresh produce, we received additional funding because of the high increase in produce and the issues we've had with delivery. So DESE had given each district money. So far we have received $8,500 additional for our produce program. So that is great. We got that in December and we've already started using a lot of it to get fresh produce into all the schools. And the other USDA, I don't know if anyone had heard, there was a $17.8 million funds that the USDA recently have announced for supply chain assistance. Actually, it was a lot bigger than that. DESE is expecting 17.8 for this state alone to go to all SFA accounts. So we are not quite sure how that is going to get distributed. It is for supply chain assistance because of the skyrocketing price in food that we are all seeing at the market, as well as from our own vendors, as well as the disruptions in getting product to the schools. So the USDA sees the problem and is supplementing with extra funds for us to make up because we've had to spend so much money.
All right, Ms. Leal.
Then if you,
Ms. Leal, if you want to pause right there for a minute. I'm looking around the room to see if anybody has any questions on this particular slide. Ms. Ducharme.
So with information that you have available now, understanding you obviously can't see into the future, while this is good news, do you anticipate with the increase in costs and the supply chain disruption that we've seen so far, do you think this is going to be enough?
I do. Based on our budget from what we have, we are making enough money to cover our expenses and still have money into the revolving account. And because we are serving so many more students, it's definitely beneficial. So as of right now, I think it would be enough to supply for that. And we are starting to see a correction in supply chain as far as getting our deliveries on time when we order things. We're not quite sure, like I said, how much we're going to get of the 17.8. I believe it's going to be based on enrollment, but that's just complete speculation that we're kind of talking amongst ourselves, how they're going to divvy up that money.
All right, I'm going to follow up. Really, it's freaky today. I'm going to follow up on Ms. Ducharme's comment to you, Ms. Leal. Your answer is that we'll have enough just based on the extra 25 cents and 14 cents in your first bullet, regardless of how much we get out of the last bullet for the supply chain disruption?
Yes, that's correct, because we haven't been getting the 25 cents or 14 cents yet this school year. It starts in January, so when I do the reimbursement claim for January, we'll see that increase. And each month we have not gone into the red. So we do a monthly profit and loss, and we have still been okay. Not as much as we did in years past, but we've still been okay.
Fantastic. And one more question. Do you have, kind of like last year, I believe it was last year, the food services department bought the refrigerated truck? So do you have something in mind if we get extra money from the supply chain disruption? Do you have something in mind that you've been jonesing to buy that we'll be able to purchase with that extra money?
I do. I actually had a meeting the other day, and I have one coming up on Friday for certain things. Last year, we also did buy the vending machines. I bought a awesome convection oven as well as a steamer, and we're getting a whole new serving line for the high school. So we definitely are investing back into the program, and I have a couple of things that I'm looking at, seeing what I want to do for next year as well.
Awesome. I'll scroll for you now.
So we are recently started an after-school snack program because breakfast and lunch is the universal free. It got extended into the snack program. So in late November, I offered all the schools that are offering after-school programs, whether it's through enrichment or education, if they wanted to partake in the program. Right off the bat, we had 2 elementary schools. We offered it again in the beginning of the school year. So right now we have 4 elementary schools that offer after-school enrichment or education programs that we provide snacks for. We receive funding for each of the snacks that we do serve. And hopefully, I think it's going to continue all through this school year.
Okay, I'm looking around the room. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Leal on the after-school snack program? Okay, there are no questions in the room, Ms. Leal.
Okay.
Ms. Sherburne, are you up for the school choice funding?
Yes, I will discuss that. So as you know, when we build our budget, we build it on a premise of what the school choice funding would be, and it's projected on what the receipts were for FY21. And our receipts for FY21 was $677,675, with 127.2 students attending Beverly instead of the city of residence school. And just the 0.2 is if they weren't here for a full year. The budget offset was set at $705,676, we were planning on utilizing the carryover in the revolving funds in the amount of $28,001, which you would see on the revenue report that I go over later on. But as of, we just received in December, as of October 1st enrollment report, Beverly's preliminary revenues released will be $747,160, and we have an increase up to 137 students attending Beverly. Therefore, this will be an increase of 41,484 over the budget offset that we set for FY22. Our plans for that would be to have that available for additional positions that we may need next year, where we can increase our budget offset from school choice in our FY23 budget. We would not want to appropriate this because this number can fluctuate, because you can have students that drop off of the school choice at any time. So we usually receive a report in December, and then we receive one around March, and then the ending final one is in June. So this was just information for the committee, just to let you know on this one particular revenue source, what changes has been made.
Yeah, I'm looking around the room. Anybody have any questions for Ms. Sherburne on this wonderful news on this particular slide? Ms. Sherburne, the 41,484, in addition to the 28,001, the 28,001 would simply stay in the revolving account, and the 41,484 would be added to the revolving account?
Yes, yep. So what we had for the, at the end of the fiscal year got carried over into FY, in the revolving funds, as it's called, the revolving, it revolves. And so that if we do have other areas that we need to put money in because we have overages somewhere else, that's where a source we could go to.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm scrolling.
Next thing I have is I'm going to be reviewing the revenues, reviewing the expenses, and we do have acceptance of gifts to school. There's one.
And would you like to go to acceptance of gifts to schools first, because that requires a vote?
Sure, we can do that. Of course, I did not print out mine. For the month of December, we did only have one gift to school. We received a check of $250 from Global Child that we put into the district-wide. That would be in the gifts to schools account under district-wide. That would be under the direction of the superintendent or the assistant superintendent to deem what those funds could be used for. Global Child does teach foreign language to our students in the elementary schools. We do not charge rental to the Global Child program, and they usually give us a donation based on their enrollments that they have to the school district in lieu of rental.
Fantastic. Committee members, I'm looking for a motion to accept this $250 in gifts to schools.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Ducharme. Any questions, comments, discussion about this? Who would ever say no to free money? Here we go. There's a motion on the table. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5-0. That passes unanimously. Okay. Revenues now, Ms. Sherburne.
Sure, that would be great. So as you can see here, our revenues, so the appropriation has not changed from the city, and that we receive those payments in quarterly. The next one is your school choice. So we did have in FY22, we have the 705,676 that I just spoke about. And then we were planning on having a carryover amount. We've removed that, and that we're receiving 41,484 over our projected budget. Circuit breaker revenue, we were anticipating 2,110,660, and when we received the report from the Department of Education, this year we're going to be receiving an additional 474,238 over the what we projected. Excuse me. For a total of $2,584,898. I just want to remind the committee that this funding, whatever we receive in FY21, needs to be spent before the end of FY22. Anything we receive in FY22 needs to be spent by the end of FY23. We have been luckily in the past year been able to carry over the entire amount that we received one year into the next year, which is a great place to be. At one time, we were having to spend half of the amount that we received in the fiscal year on that particular fiscal year. So we're in a much better position with the circuit breaker now. Just keep in mind that when we see something like a 474,000 and we think that's a lot, well, if we do have an out of placement that's a residential, that could be eaten up by 2 students. So that's one thing, is that We, by law, do have to spend what we have in the revolving account, and we will do that this year. But that's one thing that, we did get a favorable increase. Special education tuition, we're anticipating $93,933. That would be coming from other communities that are sending their students to our school district for one of our special education programs. Non-resident tuition, which is a SEVIS program that's at the high school. We are anticipating $38,000, and we have received $73,000. So that is for students that attend our school district for 1 year. And we've been using those funds for our Teach 6 programs, where the teachers teach an additional class in lieu of their prep period. They receive a stipend for that, and we're able to do that. Pretty much this is something that the superintendent and Ms. Taylor can discuss on other areas that we could use this funding for. Miscellaneous revenue, we haven't had any monies deposited into that. That's actually a line item on when people can pay their taxes. They can put in a amount for to go towards, I'm sorry, that's the education fund. Miscellaneous revenue is if we have any donations directly to the school district that's not a gifts to school, that it has a specific item, and we haven't had any. I'm actually thinking that should be removed from the report next month. Education fund is where people can put additional monies from their taxes if they wanted to go directly to the school district, and we've received $450 thus far this year. And in that fund, there is something that the superintendent can look at to see what, where we would want that put to. The residents designate that it's for education. So if there's any particular program, I believe in the past, we've used it for robotics and other items like that. So that would be under the superintendent's purview. The next area is the school department fees. So the transportation revolving, we were anticipating $218,600. When we were doing that, we were basing it on user fees and charters, and we've received $221,509 right now, and it was not all based on user fees. There's been some that number, we really haven't been hitting the 218.6. That number has been approximately 20,000 less in the past few years on what we actually receive from the students. Just to recall that when we do charge for the user fees or any of our fees, people in the community can apply for a scholarship through our business office. If they're not able to afford it, they can show their income and go through a scholarship process that we don't have a set of money for. It's just that's how we just reduce on what we're receiving into our programs. And so it can be, the reason why I'm saying that is if the 218.6 and we usually have been receiving in just under 200, it's still a guesstimate based on, if we have more trips, and obviously we're not doing as much with, field trips, but that would be an area there. But I have enough money that's coming in for our offset for this year, so we're good with that. Any additional monies we receive will go into the revolving account and will be carried over into the next fiscal year. Building rental fees in the YMCA, as you realize, we're not renting out the buildings as much as we have in the past. Currently, it's pretty much the YMCA, and we do have a church, and there's a few other areas that we're receiving very little funding from, because we really haven't opened up our schools because of COVID to just anybody to have their, items going on in the schools. Our budget offset is $220,000, and we've received $77,623 to date. I do have at least $142,377 in the revolving account, so I'm not concerned about that, us not bringing in those. I do believe that we're probably going to be close to the receiving the 142, but I may be off, but I'm going to say approximately 50,000 if I had to guess right now. But I would take that from the revolving. What this budget offset goes towards is custodial salaries. And what I forgot to say in the transportation is goes towards bus driver salaries. The preschool revolving account is 45,881 is our budget offset. It goes towards a portion of a teacher's salary. Excuse me, and they have actually are anticipating 200,000 based on enrollment. They did receive 83,994, which saying we have to still collect 116,006. And that is paid monthly, so we do still have January to June to receive payments. We have seen an uptick of some people that haven't been able to make their payments, so therefore we have reached out to them to see if they do need to do a new scholarship or discuss their funding. Any additional funding that we receive over and above what we have for a budget offset would go into the revolving account for only preschool items. So if they needed to open up a new classroom, or if they need new supplies for the classroom, things can come from there. If there's a greater need for a paraprofessional, we could charge a paraprofessional there. So that, you know, again, the funding is raised for preschool and would only be spent on preschool. The kindergarten revolving account, that's the 67,740. That was used to offset on kindergarten teacher salaries, and that was from the carryover. So as you know, we're not charging kindergarten revolving, and this will be the last year that we actually have an expenditure going to the kindergarten revolving account to zero out that account. The high school athletics, it's high school and the middle school athletic program user fees, 209,748 is what we have as a budget offset for FY22, and that same number we've been using, very similar to the transportation. We've been using the same number each year for the past few years, and we've had 2 seasons already and have collected 126,867 with an anticipation that the last season will be 82,881. If we are not able to collect that, we do have money available in the revolving account, or we would have to pick up some of the expenses into the appropriated for the end of the year. Elementary school, elementary string and band, we're not charging fees anymore. And the summer academy, we haven't been charging fees for the past few years. Any questions on the revolving?
I'm looking around the room. I see none. Would you like to go to expenditures?
Sure. Unfortunately, I did not print out my expenditure report to bring for me, so if somebody is asking a particular question, I'll just ask if you can go to that page for me.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the expenditure report. The it's for FY22. It's period 99, which that tells you that it's up to date. If anybody has done any kind of purchase order encumbrance, that is already in there. And any expenses that we have expended to date is under the year-to-date expended report column, the 1, 2, 3, 4th column. Yep. And then the available budget is the second to last column, and in the percentage used. So some areas, the percentage used, so like the school committee gets paid monthly, so it's about 50%, so right on target with that. And then we do have a lot of different payroll categories that some people that are paid, 52 pay periods, some that are paid 26 equal checks, some that are 22, 44. So sometimes the numbers are vary. And so, looking at the superintendent line, we're at the 57.7. So that's probably pretty much what the weekly amount is if you were looking at somebody that's paid 52 weeks, we're about at that portion. Of course, I always look at the different areas, with oh my goodness, substitutes and for the special education area. I'm looking at those. We have to look at those and see if there's some funding that needs to be shifted elsewhere. So at this point, there might be some lines that do look like they have money, but we need to double check, make sure that we haven't pushed too much into the grants or the revolving accounts. If anybody has any particular questions on anything, I'd be glad to see what I can answer from here.
I am looking around the room.
I think I will add that the kindergarten lines you will see are a little off than the other. So Lorinda has stopped at CE 075, and you can see that most of the accounts are at 42%, but you see that the kindergarten is at 52, and that's because I haven't pushed the money out, the expenses out to the revolving account that I just spoke about a few minutes ago. So I don't always like to push it out at the beginning of the year because then it throws it off, and I try to do it about the midway. So I'll be making those adjustments, and then it'll show the opposite, you know, like we'll have underexpended those lines. Excuse me. But right now, the teacher salary line should be approximately at the 42.3. And that's something that will fluctuate all the time based on there may be somebody that has taken a day without pay, or somebody's out on maternity leave. So sometimes you'll see those numbers lower than the 42. And then some areas we may have higher numbers, and I'd have to look at that particular line to see if I have somebody being charged to incorrect line to make that adjustment.
All right, so I'm looking around the room to see if anyone, yes, Mr. Manzo.
Well, I hate to bring this up because it looks really good, but page 33, the substitute line, it looks like you've got a lot of money left in that line. And so I'm wondering, is there a reason why that account is particularly flush?
Yeah, so the account right now, the substitute line does seem a little, looks pretty positive at the moment right now. What we do need to look at is that some of the lines that may be off, that I have too much being charged to a particular account, may be offset over there. So in some cases where we have somebody that I anticipate that was out, and they're getting paid. So sometimes teachers are taking a leave that's a little bit longer, that I don't know that we're all of a sudden going to be paying that long-term substitute longer. So this is one area that I am looking at and will be watching to see, do we have some savings here that can be pushed to something else? And if we were going to, we'd want to make sure it would be, you know, one-time funding that we'd source, that we'd be looking for, not something that we can't hire more staff because then next year those funds wouldn't be available. But, you know, we have had the issue with, you know, substitutes, you know, a lot of absences. The other thing too is with the COVID, that we've been getting funding in for the COVID absences. So that's an offset too that was not planned. The one that you're looking at right now, the OT 660 is I think the professional development line, OT, and that's something that the items probably were charged to grants, or there's not as many professional developments that our staff is going to because of COVID. Everything is, you know, more remote.
Did I go to the wrong page?
But yes, Mr. Manzo, that is one area that I am watching for a surplus.
I'm sorry, Mr. Manzo, that I went to the wrong page.
Yes, he was talking about that one there you're talking, yeah.
Okay.
So it looks like we've spent 200,000. If we're midway through the year, not knowing if we're going to have more, you know, maternity leaves, you know, so I would, you know, as a guesstimate right now, if we've spent 197, say 200,000, I do believe that we'd be spending an additional 200,000 for the remainder of the year. However, what we don't know is how many maternity leaves where people are going to be So the first 8 weeks of maternity leave, the employee still gets paid and gets paid out of their account number, but we need to have a substitute in their place, and they usually are getting paid, when we know it's going to be a long term, they would get paid at the bachelor's one rate if it's a long-term sub, which is $248 a day. So that is one area that I'm watching. Pleasantly watching.
I will say that to some extent it's better than watching it because it's too low, right?
Correct.
However, Mr. Manzo, at our last whole meeting, we had a discussion about the fact that about the fact that you brought this up at the previous F&F meeting, and why do we have extra funds there, and the difficulty in getting subs right now, for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to some people, the Great Resignation, and some people not wanting to come into a school based on the pandemic. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's a real easy answer. There's no easy solution. That said, I think we'll continue to have discussions. What I brought to the table last time was the fact that maybe if we were paying more money, if we did an emergency bump up in our subpay, maybe it would attract more people in the short term. That's a conversation that I think we'll probably continue to have.
And I imagine there are probably a lot of communities faced with the same issues. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know how difficult would it be to go do a search regionally and say who's increased the pay, and has it had an effect, or are we just paying more money to the few people that are showing up?
All right, Dr. Chirocek, and then Dr.
I think
McKenzie.
Mr. Manzo's been in our offices lately because that's what we've been doing. No, so we had the conversation at the last school committee meeting. We'll mention it again tonight at school committee, but what we have been looking into and researching is we had heard of other communities that have done that, others that haven't, and so Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Sherburne have been working together to kind of gather the data around for what is the pay, what are the changes, what are the implications, as well as monitoring the attendance rate. So we don't have that for this evening, but we will have that for the February 6th, 9th, the next school committee meeting, coming forward with some information, because we are doing that research, because it's a great question and it's a great thing to wonder. Our preliminary findings are kind of scattered. If you had a scattergram, you have some communities are the same, some communities have gone up, some communities have scaffolded it differently, but we are all, I think there's an article in the New York Times today or yesterday about the battle over substitutes, right? It's becoming a competition to attract, and how do we do it, because everyone's suffering the same kind of challenges getting people in, and some unique strategies of parents coming in, working, how do we get them in the door? But thankfully, the good news, at least preliminarily, is our attendance numbers were much improved over the last 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of January were really challenging for us, obviously, with the uptick in all of that. But we have a group of people that are looking into that and collecting some research, and are going to come forward at the next school committee meeting 2 weeks from now with some information on that.
Dr. McKenzie.
Thanks. So thank you. I think some of that was addressed in your comment. In our last meeting, I think one of the variables we talked about is that typically we are pulling from retired teachers and retired individuals who are more vulnerable in the pandemic. And so it was not just a matter of economics and incentivizing in that way. And so one of the things we were wondering about is how to cull from other types of community members, whether that's local graduate schools, et cetera. So I was just curious about whether there will be information available with regard to either like characteristics or demographics of the folks who are likelier to be able to participate at this time. Although I think as the spike goes down and attendance improves, like you said, we probably won't be, in such dire straits. But I do think that the typical participant and their unique vulnerability is a lot of what we are seeing, and not just with regard to pay.
Okay, so that conversation will continue. And we are pushing up against the half hour. So, Ms. Sherburne, this was the last item I had on my tabs. And the last item in we already did our gifts to schools. We have no transfers this evening. Is there anything else you want to discuss?
Nope, I do not have anything to discuss. I'll have conversation with Ms. Visnick as far as any guests that we want to have at the next meeting. I tentatively have scheduled the special education director to talk to us in March.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. It's not debatable. All those in favor? That passes 5-0. Thank you, everybody. We'll meet again in about a month. I don't have that date in front of me, but your date is February 9th.
This is a week later though, February vacation. I believe you guys are meeting on the 16th, February vacation fall. Recording, right?
Okay, your mic's not on. It's okay. Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is. Let me say that again. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is Wednesday, January 26, 2022. This is the Beverly Public Schools Committee of the Whole meeting. We are meeting in a hybrid remote option. Our school committee members and members of the district administration team are all here in person, but I did just want to explain that we have other participants that are joining us using a remote meeting application provided at no cost to our district, and we are running with captioning to allow remote participations and the public to access the open portions of our meeting. We are also recording tonight's meeting and being broadcast and streamed by BevCam. We thank BevCam for supporting us. On June 16th, 2021, the governor signed Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, which, among other things, allows public bodies to continue to hold meetings remotely until April 1st, 2022. This act specifically suspends the need for a quorum and the chair to be physically present and asks our body to use technical methods to allow for safe public access. We would encourage viewers to utilize BevCam's streaming options this evening if possible. And as a note, Beverly has had prior approval for remote participation, although in that case, the chair and a quorum would physically be present. So we do have the option to continue this hybrid model that has worked so well for our participants that prefer to join us from home. Tonight is a committee of the whole meeting, which means that we do not have an agenda item specifically for addressing this body. We will resume with that in our February regular school committee meeting. And we do not have an executive session planned, so we will just have an open session this evening. As I mentioned, we are joined by members of the school committee, various members of the district administration and leadership teams, and I will conduct a roll call attendance for the record, since the meeting application sometimes does not display all participants. Please remember that any audio or video that you supply on this platform will become part of the meeting record. As such, we encourage you to use your mute functionality, and your camera can be on or off if you're participating remotely. This will prevent background noises and any inadvertent submission to the programming. Now I'd like to conduct a roll call. Remind those that are here, when you press your button once, the green light will come on and BevCam will be able to hear you. Present for the school committee, Mayor Michael Cahill.
Here.
Ms. Kimberly Coelho.
Here.
Dr. Kenan McKenzie.
Here.
Ms. Karen Robinson.
Here.
Dr. Jeffrey Silva.
Here.
Ms. Lorinda Visnick.
Here.
And Ms. Rachel Abel. For our administrator and leadership team, we have Dr. Sue Chirocek.
Here.
Participating remotely, we have Dorothy Flaherty.
Here.
Thank you, Dr. Flaherty. We also have remotely Ms. Jean Sherburne.
Here.
In person, we have Dr. Andre Morgan. Here. And Ms. Erin Brown. Here. Thank you. Participating remotely, I saw Ms. Bethany Splansky.
Here.
We have Principal Amy Blanchard.
Here.
We have Principal Betty Taylor.
Here.
We have our Transportation Director, Dana Cruikshank, still on the line.
Here.
Okay, and we are also joined by two others. We have Keita Fisher.
Here.
Thank you. And Miss Mindy Ippolito, sorry.
Here.
And actually, our nurse case leader, Judy Elder, is on the line.
Here.
Okay. I think that's our roll call. We are all physically present, so all of our votes will be by hands. And it is my pleasure now to look to our agenda. The first item is our Pledge of Allegiance. And I'd like to ask Ms. Visnick, actually, I don't think you've done it in a while. The flag is on this side of the pillar for those in the audience. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our next agenda item is the acceptance of the meeting records from our December 15th, 2021 Committee of the Whole. May I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Thank you, Dr. Silva.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. Were there any corrections, additions? Not seeing any. All those in favor? It's 7-0. Okay. And the chair is requesting that tonight we take a couple of agenda items out of order to respect our guests that are joining us this evening. First, we're going to hear about the overnight field trip request, and then we're going to have a Green Beverly update from Mr. Dienberg. Okay.
Hi, I'm Krista Mariscalchi, and I'm here to request an overnight for my DECA students from March 10th through March 12th in Boston. The students have just participated in the district competition, and I believe it's 88 students are moving on to the state competition in Boston. This year, there's no hybrid version or remote version. It's all in person. It will be at the Copley, and actually it's getting really big, so it's actually another hotel, but I know our students will be staying at the Copley. And so I'm just hoping that we will have permission from the school committee that we can attend.
Ms. Visnick.
First thing, I think it's awesome. This program is really one of the highlights of our school system.
Thank you.
So I just really want to jump up and down. I think it's fantastic how many children always move on.
Thank you.
This year, do you expect that many of your students who qualified are in fact going to be affected by the vaccine mandate?
So there is a
in
vaccine
Boston?
mandate. Massachusetts DECA put out, I'm actually not sure if it passed down through national DECA, but Mass DECA has put a mandate that all students have to be double vaccinated to be able to attend. So that is that. I've had a few parents contact me regarding their students not being vaccinated. And, you know, it seems like the kids really still want to go. So I think a lot of the parents are, kind of mulling it over to make sure that, that their kids can really do what they want to be able to do. I wish I could have those students compete, remotely, but unfortunately it's not an option. But other than maybe 2 or 3, at this point, it seems like I have not had no pushback at all.
Follow it.
Go ahead.
There's no Mass DECA or the Copley or whomever has not provided any kind of a exemption.
No, there's no exemption. So there's no exemption. I know I have one student that has a medical reason for not doing it. And I approached Massachusetts DECA and they said, unfortunately, no. So there's no exemptions.
That's unfortunate. Okay.
Did I see another hand? Questions? I had a few questions if you would
Absolutely.
entertain those. With Boston being so close, I wasn't quite clear on what the transportation was looking like, and with it being a 3-day conference, if they were spending 2 nights or 3 nights at the
So it's 2
Copley.
nights. So we'll leave Thursday afternoon, and we will stay over Thursday night and Friday night. So it's just 2 nights.
And what's the
Transportation would be bus. So I usually have to, with that many kids, it's either 3 or 4 buses because we have to bring their luggage in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mayor Cahill.
Ms. Mariscalchi, it's so good to see you.
It's nice to
and I
see
want
you,
to
too.
echo, we're excited that the students are getting to do this again. Similar to the question about vaccines, what's the requirement in terms of masking?
So
in the
Boston has
different
a mask
settings?
mandate. So in the hotel, the students will have to wear their masks at all times, as well as anywhere indoors. The students aren't actually allowed to leave our hotel. Luckily, the Copley is attached to the 2 malls. So the students are able to, on their downtime, go into like the malls and shop and, just, browse and do things like that to kind of keep them occupied, which is really nice. But when they're in any building, they have to wear their masks, especially, when they're competing, when they go down to, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they have to wear their masks until they eat, same as school rules.
And how many students per room is the plan in the hotel?
So they are allowing, so the way the rooms, it's kind of confusing, but they are allowing 3 to 4, but they're also giving parents the option to do doubles. So the way I put it out there for the parents was that if they wanted their child to be in a double, they just had to pick up the difference in cost. So,
So
'cause
2
otherwise-
up to 4.
Yeah, so otherwise I just split it among, all of the groups. So basically I say, okay, we have 35 hotel rooms, 35, divided by the number of kids that are there, and that would be the cost. But if parents are choosing to do the doubles, they would just, pay the difference. And I've already have about 3 or 4 that have requested that.
And how many chaperones in total are signed on?
So with DECA, it's one per 10. But we can do, so what I typically do is I have a good number stay overnight. So I'll have maybe two or 3 rooms of chaperones that stay overnight. And then I have some that come in on Friday and Saturday during the day.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
wonderful.
Dr. McKenzie.
All right, thanks again. I have a rising 9th grader who cannot wait to do DECA.
Oh, great. I look forward to it.
Yeah, so I do have a quick question
Sure.
about the accommodations as well.
Yep.
I know for practical reasons, we cannot give everyone their own hotel room.
Correct.
But is there going to be any encouragement for testing for students because they're sharing a space?
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. I've been talking to a few parents, and I might put it out there, well, as long as it's okay with the schools, that students test before we leave, if that's approved by Beverly High School. But there is none per math DECA. So I'm not sure if that's, so again, I wouldn't mind if we did, the rapid test or, right before everybody left, just to make sure everybody was as safe as we could be.
Dr. Churchak.
So I would just say, there's more information coming later tonight about an at-home rapid testing program.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly have availability, and anyone that
Great.
opts into that option would have a kit that they would have available to take a test on that Wednesday
Yes, I
morning.
saw that.
So
That's great.
that's the day before you leave, right?
Right.
Wednesday morning. So that shouldn't be an issue if in fact if they opt into
Okay.
that opportunity.
Okay,
So
I'll
just
put that out
sharing
there,
that
I'll put
Yeah.
that out there in an email to the parents.
Yeah.
Ms. Bisnick.
What are the accommodations for children who have qualified but maybe financially cannot afford to attend? Or in this case, you say we're sharing, in the very least, they have their hotel room expense.
Yep. Typically, I don't have any issues. I do a lot of fundraising. So if there's ever a student that a parent approaches me, I try to figure it out through different things that the school system has. I've approached guidance before. Sometimes I'll reach out to some local businesses and I'll have a donation cover a portion of their stay. I also tell parents obviously that if they can't afford to pay everything up front, that they can pay it in increments as well. But I typically make sure I will never, ever let a student not be able to attend. So with fundraising, if need be, I will use my fundraising money.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bisnick, that you beat me to my question, so thank you.
Great.
If there's no other questions, should we entertain a motion?
Motion to approve this field trip?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Bisnick and Mayor Cahill. Are there any additional questions?
I'm just going to recuse myself from this vote because I have a child participating.
Okay. Understandable. Okay. Any more questions? All those in favor of sending DECA to Boston?
Fabulous.
Okay.
And raise my hand too.
Thank you. 601.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much
night.
for your time this evening. Okay, and as I mentioned, I'd like to just go a little out of order to respect Mr. Berg's time. Please step right up to the microphone. Thank you so much for being here. I need to just pull up the slides that you have given me. And you'll all remember that Mr. Berg joined us a couple months ago. See if those are coming up.
Perfect.
And let's see if I can go. The taskbar is right over where the presenter. There we go. Well, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Ms. Abel, and thank you, committee members, administration, leadership team. Thank you for allowing me to come back and provide a quick update on what's happening with Green Beverly. So you can go on to the next slide, Ms. Abel. If you may remember, we really look at our organization as having two primary halves. One is what we call community projects, and those are projects that have a broader impact. They impact in a positive way. They impact a broader set of the population or residents or citizens. They often involve a number of stakeholders in the community, like the city, the schools, local businesses, and sometimes they're more complex projects. The other side of our organization was what we call community engagement, which is really working with residents and businesses one-on-one in many cases. All of our events fall into this category. It's where we're providing outreach and engagement to the community. So I'll provide the update in these two categories. I just kind of wanted to set that foundation. So you can go ahead to the next slide. I'll talk about 3 community projects that are in process that we're rolling into 2022 with. And we have a number of other projects that are in the pipeline, from concept to being researched to waiting for funding. But these are 3 projects I'll talk about that we're rolling forward with. The first one is called Urban Ag, or Urban Agriculture. So and I can't quite read it from here, but I think I generally know the project. The general purpose or the goal of a project is to do what we can to help increase our local food production in the greater Beverly area or in the North Shore area. The diagram on the right, if you're not quite sure why we're doing this or what the impact is, the diagram on the right was from a study that was done some time ago, but numbers haven't really changed that much. And it's comparing a meal that was sourced in a local, I think a 75-mile region, compared to a meal that was sourced through the traditional supermarket chains, and hence food was coming from, in this case, from the West Coast. You probably can't read the fine print there, but the difference in those 2 meals is anywhere from 5 to 17 times different from an environmental carbon footprint perspective. So having more local food is huge from an environmental footprint or environmental carbon footprint perspective. So this project was submitted to a Tufts University program, and they selected it as one of the field projects that they have 5 university master students that will be working on this project this spring semester under our guidance or under our leadership. And the end result from this project is to formalize what we're calling as a coalition of various partners, organizations that are in this local food supply chain. And from that coalition, then, it is expected that they will work on recommendations and a plan for how we can increase food production. Those recommendations we expect we will take forward into other grant proposal opportunities. You can go to the next slide, unless there are questions on this project. Okay, you can go to the next slide. The second project that we're working on is called Green Up 100. So this is a project that is focused on helping our low-income housing or low-income families to upgrade to 100% renewable electricity at no incremental cost. So we're working directly with Harbor Lake Community Partners, the Beverly Housing Authority, and the YMCA on their tenants, on their housing, and working with them through the logistics of upgrading to renewable energy. So any questions on this project? One final thing I'll say on this project is we're also looking at different marketing programs around this to also inspire other residents of Beverly to upgrade as well. And this will tie into an upcoming city program that will be rolling out sometime next year as well. So that is all kind of almost setting the stage for more work that we want to do in that area. Yep, go ahead. The third project is called Food Diversion. So this is a project that is, hey, look. Yes, Ms. Visnick was very instrumental in getting this project off the ground and helping us. We won a grant for this project, and Ms. Visnick was very helpful in helping us get the materials ready for the grant and the grant proposal, so thank you. This project is focused on rediverting our edible food from our excess edible food from restaurants, supermarkets, and local farms to ultimately our various organizations in the Beverly area that feed our food insecure. There are many organizations, as I'm sure you all know, that have one night a week or one night a month or various times throughout the calendar year in which they're feeding our food insecure. So this program is really, number one, the primary focus is keeping that edible food out of the waste stream. That's the sustainable environmental side of the project. Certainly there's another social benefit here, which is helping support food insecurity or food security. So that's that project. It's really capturing from the restaurants, it's storing it in a central location and then allowing that to be distributed through our existing organizations in town.
Mayor Cahill.
Thanks, Madam President. Dean, could you just give us a little checklist of the kinds of foods that are easily put into that kind of a program?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I'll say part of this is to be determined as we get into the project, but we have seen through what is already done that frozen food is fairly easy from this standpoint. Chilled food may be a little bit harder. Produce maybe a little bit harder. Certainly dry goods is an option here. It's probably a little bit easier. But as we get into this, our plan is to start talking to supermarkets and restaurants, understand what they have for excess food. Also talk to the organizations that are distributing and trying and understand what they really need, and then see what that gap is, and then go from there.
And does it include dealing with like sell-by dates and trying to take things right at that line and get them quickly to people for use? Or?
It does, yeah. And we've had conversations with Bootstraps about how they handle their food pantry. Right now, we'll probably follow that same structure, that same guideline. But it does, yeah.
Dr. Silva.
When you say frozen food, does this mean prepared foods that are frozen?
Could be, yes. One of the examples that I was fortunate enough to witness firsthand was with Ms. Visnick was capturing prepared soup that has then been frozen from a restaurant. So, yes.
Ms. Visnick?
So two things. One, Dr. Silva, the restaurants can participate. There's some other entity that says, we want you to do this instead of throwing your stuff out. And they have very strict food handler regulations around, they get a bag from this other entity, they measure it, they put a date on it, and they freeze it that same night that they didn't serve it. And then, Dean and I went on an adventure. Every 2 weeks, I go to a local restaurant, not super local, but a restaurant, and pick up soup and bring it back to Beverly. So that's one example. But I want to say that in the past, our school system has been incredibly helpful in the same type of way. And when we were giving our lunches to go, when we were in not in session, and we were giving our lunches to go, any lunches that didn't go were given to the same local entities around here. The First Baptist Church people and Ellis Square Friends got a lot of food. I shouldn't say a lot. They got some food from the Beverly. They made a lunch and then nobody came and picked it up. And rather than throw that out, it got given to someone else in the city of Beverly. So that's a fresh food example. And certainly the timing is much more important. And so depending on what day Christina Leal called me and said we have food is based on where the food then went, right? Because different organizations feed on different nights of the week.
Having worked at Beverly Hospital Kitchen in high school and college, having them make lots of meals, I can tell you that that's potentially an area that you could harvest. Yeah.
Okay, the last slide. So this is more on the community engagement side. It's a busy slide, I'm sorry, but I'll talk through it real quick. So on above the timeline, we have two major events that are upcoming. We call these cornerstone events. Our plan right now is to do 4 events, major events per year. These just happen to be 2 months back to back. One is a community conversation with the Cabot, at the Cabot, and we're calling it Coastal Communities Talk Water, so it certainly has a water theme. And that is on March 10th, and we're in the planning stages of that right now. The general flow, the general expected flow is that we'll do 3 10-minute TED Talk-like talks, and then it'll open up for Q&A after that. The next major event is we're doing in conjunction with the city. So we're working with Arena quite extensively on this, and that is Earth Fest. That will be at Lynch Park. It's, I think, a couple days after Earth Day. So it'll be on the 24th of April. And that'll be more festival-like, more fair-like, just starting to get into the planning on that. So more to come on that. On the bottom, some of that might be overlaid there, but we have a number of workshops. So we also have coaches that specialize in certain subject matter, and they do workshops throughout the year in different locations. We have 3 workshops upcoming at the library. It's the Monday morning, as part of the Monday morning library session. So we're doing 1 per month here over the next 3 months, and you can see the topics there. We're also doing 2 workshops at Endicott College in the months of February and March. And then the third one, we're Long Hill, it's covered up there. I'll tell you what it says. So we're working with the trustees, specifically at Long Hill. They've done a lot of work in building a sustainable horticultural center. And we are providing coaches in the lawn, garden, composting, pollinator area to deliver 4 different courses in the month of March. So they are billing this as a series of 4 courses in the month of March every Saturday morning, and our coaches are delivering those courses. And the last thing I want to mention, I wrote it in big, bold letters there, so I wouldn't forget. Recently, just this last week, talked to Julie Ferrara, I think, okay, about the fact that Green Beverly would love to host any seniors as part of a senior project. So got things in motion there. So that's what I have for an update. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Do we have any more questions? Mayor Cahill.
Thanks, Madam President. Dean, can you give any data from the pumpkin smash?
I can, yes.
And let anybody who doesn't know anything about it know what it was, and that it's hopefully coming back again later this year?
It is, yes. The day after we had the pumpkin smash, we decided that will be an annual event, yes. Thank you for... So for those of you that may not be familiar with the pumpkin smash, this past November, the first week in November, we held an event out at Moraine Farm, on the new entry sustainable farming project at Moraine Farm. That was, from an environmental standpoint, was focused on composting of pumpkins that came out of the Halloween season. And we set up as a family event, a community event. We had a number of kind of fun games there. There was a pumpkin catapult there. There was a pumpkin smash board there that we actually borrowed from Newton, City of Newton. They've done this for a couple of years, and that's where we got the idea. Weather was beautiful. We had 450 people, in excess of 450 people there. The parking lot was bulging, and we were trying to figure out where to park people. We estimated that we composted or threw pumpkins into the compost pile that equated to roughly 13,000 pounds. And I can't remember the carbon emission equivalent, but that's easy to calculate at that point. So yeah, it's absolutely going to be an annual event. Yeah. Thank you for anybody that attended that.
Thank you so much. Well, we appreciate the updates, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and the engagement and the projects. And thank you so much for including our seniors. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for our students as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abel. Thank you.
Dr. Chorchak, I've noticed we have a couple more members in our audience, and I wonder if we could entertain the calendar discussion next? Okay. I'll just recognize we have our Human Rights Committee members, the Chair, Kaja Johnson, and Paul Goodwin are in our audience as well. Sure, yeah,
Okay,
thank you so much. I did hand out a copy of a version 2. Oh, I can remove this. Thank you. And I will, I can pull those calendars up, but why don't we let Dr. Church explain the differences and the color coding and what we're seeing in these two proposals.
Thank you, thank you. So I apologize for two versions. I will explain that the first version that came out to you was the draft version, and I had actually an opportunity. What I customarily do with the calendar is bring it, and we sit with the union and we talk with the union and we, kind of run it through a different couple of groups. And after I had forwarded this to you, it came to my attention that we had we had a change suggested that I actually think was a very valuable change suggestion. So I had Donna redo the calendar and we incorporated that in the second version that you got. So the purple highlighting is on the second version is a change from what we sent out originally. So first I'll explain to you the color coding. So the first item is the yellow highlighted date. That's September 6th. That is the possible primary date for grades 1 through 12 for the possible primary that was originally scheduled. Typically, that would be the return date for our, students would attend school on Wednesday and Thursday, and then have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, but then that Tuesday is the primary date. So we're proposing that be a no school day. So we would not come back to school until Wednesday. That is a change, and that is based upon if that ends up being the primary date. Typically, I might suggest that we consider opening schools and trying to do that during the primary. However, my real concern with this is it's so early in the school year that routines aren't established for students yet. One of the ways we do that well when we do it is that we know that we've established routines for students. We know that we can manage them safely within the building, but this would only be the third day of school. So my suggestion is that we would just return to school on that Wednesday, and that would be a no school day, making that a 5-day weekend. You want me to stop there for questions?
Go ahead.
So the delay in start is really just for kindergarten and preschool?
Correct. Everybody else is in, it's just that they don't go to school and come back until Wednesday on that long weekend. Because students return, well, I can run through it right now. We would have teachers return on the 29th and the 30th. That is the 2 professional development days contractually for teachers and paras. On Wednesday, the 31st, students grades 1 through 9 would return. Again, our students in grades 10 through 12 are virtual that day. A majority of those students in 10 through 12 are in supporting the transition day in for freshmen, but we have gotten approval for that from Department of Ed, so we are proposing continuing with that. Thursday, September 1st would be a regular school day for grades 1 through 12. We utilize those days for kindergarten students for screenings and for orientation. So that's why kindergarten students aren't in school on that day. Typically, we would return on that Tuesday, September 6th, but I'm making a proposal that we would not return on the 6th. We would come back on the 7th. Does that make more sense to everybody? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Robinson has a question as well.
Thank you. So would the 6th, would that be a teacher work day or no?
I'm sorry?
Would that be a teacher work day, or do teachers have
No.
the day off as well? Okay.
It would not. It'd be no school day. It would just be at no school, nobody goes that day.
Mayor Cahill.
Thanks, Madam President. So I see the yellow and I see if the primary election date is that day, then we won't be in.
Correct.
But if the primary election date is a different day, I don't see that listed.
Well, we don't know when that other day would be. It would just move. That day would move to whenever that primary day is, and that would be
Fair
a no
enough.
school
But,
day.
but what we're asked to approve is election day is no school.
In essence, I think with that approval, I would say that if they come back and say that September 19th is, or sorry, 20th, which is a Tuesday, then we would then say that would be the no school, like we would move it. But I think we're pretty confident that it's the 6th at this point in time, but we just haven't gotten the letter from
the
whoever.
Secretary of State. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
I would just like to add a comment. I think a lot of people are planning their end of summer plans when their camps end, when their families' travel ends, and wondering if it's going to be a 5-day weekend or a 4-day weekend might cause a little bit of concern, especially with the child care or travel plans.
And Mrs. Bergeron's not here, but I believe that we will get that letter soon. We will be able to confirm that soon. It just hasn't come out yet from.
Okay. So people shouldn't book their 5-day weekend. Give us a little bit more time.
They might want to wait a little bit. I don't think it will be that long, but typically we like to wait for the letter before we say that that's confirmed. But the feeling and the idea right now is that that's the date that's going to be.
Okay.
The next area that we have for a change, and this stems from the discussion that we had at the curriculum and instruction meeting and the school committee meeting the month before that, the discussion around whether or not it was we had the opportunity to create some more opportunities for collaborative time for teachers and professional development time for teachers. We had Dr. Flaherty present at CISL the time on learning information that we had discovered. And so, and then we met back with leadership. Did we need that time? What would that time look like? We had discussion with the union, with the teachers. Is that something that the teachers would want to see, and how would that work? So we're coming forward with the proposal. This calendar has an increase of 2 more additional early release days over last year's calendar. And we space those out looking at when we would want those opportunities to happen. So as you can see, we have the orange, those that are highlighted in orange would be early release days that would be considered opportunities for collaboration. And that would be September 21st, October 19th, the December 8th, January 18th, and March 15th. Those would be 5 professional development days. We also have early release days on Wednesday, November 23rd, but that's the day before Thanksgiving. That's typically not a time that when we would plan professional development. And we have an early release day on May 26th. Teachers stay for that, but that was in the calendar last year. That's not a change. So that sort of was driven from the conversations at school committee and the desire for us to kind of come forward with some ideas about how we might be able to do that and what it would look like and how we would use that. They're proposed for K through 8, not for the high school. The high school, in meeting both with the leadership and with the union and the teaching staff there, they have opportunities, the way that they structure their exam week and the way that they utilize their time that way, they don't have the time on learning flexibility to be able to increase, or they don't even participate in early release days as it is right now. So the only early release days they have is when it precedes a holiday, and it's an early release day for all. So I just wanted to throw that out there for questions, comments.
And we would have enough cushion if we had a delayed start due to weather or something along those lines.
So we would have cushion with that, allowing for any of those things. If we had delayed arrivals or any other reason we had to go home early on a day.
I don't see any questions, so proceed.
Okay, and then I'll address the purple first so that everyone understands that before we do the one in green, because the one in green I think is why people are here. So the one in purple really, as I said, we got feedback from the union and we got feedback from some of our units, and Friday, December 23rd is a holiday for our full day clerks and our school year clerks. And so we would have to either, if we were to stay in school on the 23rd, we would have to work a negotiation out with them to either, and there are ways we could do it if everyone thought it was an important change to make. We could offer a floating holiday. We could have conversations about that. However, I think we all, we sat and we had a conversation about how it felt the week before Christmas this year and thought, perhaps maybe we should get out on Thursday and just not have school that day, push the calendar back an extra day. We already were coming back with no snow days for a half day on a Tuesday after Juneteenth. So I'm proposing that you consider having us begin our winter break on December 23rd with no school on that Friday, and then remaining and having our last day be Wednesday, January 21st. It just pushes the calendar back a day. Sorry, June, yes. I wasn't reading, I should have been. I'm ready.
I just wanted to offer an observation that I think that there's a number of families that would have intentions to travel, and allowing for our attendance to be at the minimum. I think, attendance-wise, it probably makes a lot of sense for us not to consider a school day on the 23rd.
All right, and then, and so that's the explanation of those changes. The only other item that I would bring to your attention is the item that's highlighted in green. And I had been asked to consider what would be the naming be for the holiday that is on Monday, October 10th in 2022. Traditionally called Columbus Day. There's been a number of people requesting that we, let's start with the president had made a proclamation in 2021 that we recognize Indigenous People Day. So I have highlighted that because that's for your consideration. What if there's a naming change or a naming convention or not? We did some research to just check what other districts might be doing. Again, there's a number of, it's been addressed a number of ways in some districts. So understand too that there's legislation pending in the state, at the state level, that has not been voted on yet. So, but in some communities, they have made, school committees have voted to make the change, to make it just called one or the other. They've made that decision, either made a no change decision and left it Columbus Day, made a decision to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day, and in some communities, they've left both because they are recognizing the Indigenous Peoples Day, but also leaving the Columbus Day label on the holiday. So I'm sharing that with you for your discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Churchek, and thank you, Dr. Morgan, for entertaining that concept. As I mentioned, I do see a couple members of our Human Rights Committee. I don't know if either would like to come to the microphone and offer any perspective for the school committee to consider. The second Monday in October, this year it's October 10th. Traditionally in our contracts and in prior calendars, we've called it Columbus Day. Indigenous People Day is considered in front of the House for being changed to Indigenous Peoples Day from Columbus Day for House Bill 3191 and for Senate 2027. But yet, as Dr. Churchik says, it has not yet been voted because it's still 6 to 8 months out, sorry. But if, Ms. Johnson, if you want to come to the podium, you just press the button until it's green, just for BevCam to hear you.
Let's see if I can get this right. Just one time. There you go.
Thank you so much, Madam President. It's so great to be here. Thank you for allowing the Human Rights Committee here in Beverly to read this statement that we've prepared. On October 11th, 2021, the White House proclaimed Indigenous Peoples Day, calling upon the people of the United States to honor, quote, our diverse history and the indigenous peoples who contribute to sharing this nation, quote. Changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day on the Beverly Public School calendar is an act of both patriotism and care for children and families. We are so proud that Beverly students learn about Native American history in class, particularly histories of local nations, and that our schools do not perpetuate the myth that this land was uninhabited, discovered, and then settled. We have seen how principals and teachers expose our children to enrichment, opportunities to explore and respect the diversity of Indigenous people and cultures. We want Beverly's children to move through their public education understanding the whole of our country's history. This history includes the good as well as the treacherous, and only through understanding the past can we make sound decisions and craft public policies that will benefit all of our futures. There's a great opportunity in front of us here today. By committing to increasing our knowledge of the history of this land and by formally recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day, we show Beverly students that we will walk beside them on this educational journey. We commit to respecting and recognizing Indigenous people whose contributions have and continue to shape our country's business, art, culture, sports, education, and national security and defense. Recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day, especially by our political and educational leaders, will begin to reshape our systems towards respect and truth for Native and non-Native children and families, for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for sharing that perspective. Okay. So we have a lot of sort of mix and match proposals in front of us. I thought it would be important to hear Dr. Chorchak explain, as well as hear from our Human Rights Committee before we entertain a motion to approve a calendar. We do have the caveat that Dr. Chorchak explained about the primary day being something we may need to revisit at a future meeting, but I know there are a lot of families that are interested to know what their summer camp schedules might look like, what our start date is. I think that's the biggest concern. Ms. Visnick.
I love that you're reading my eyebrows. Do you need a motion for us to discuss? Yes?
We need a motion to put forward for our calendar. There's sort of an a la carte menu here. We have additional early release days. We have the naming of the second Monday in October holiday. And we have the 23rd of December, which is being recommended as a day off in the second version.
I would like to make a motion that we accept the potpourri of colors as our starting point for discussion.
So version 2?
Version 2.
Version 2, which is on the screen.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Ms. Visnick for version 2 with a second from Ms. Robinson. Okay, and we could start discussion.
I wonder if, I'm wondering about the wording of October 10th and whether it is it best to leave the name Columbus based on some versions of history, as opposed to making it something more like Italian Heritage / Indigenous Peoples Day, if the version of history that causes us to name it Indigenous Peoples Day is taken as truth, then the individual's name, Columbus, is the same person that persecuted the indigenous people. And so having those two names side by side to me feels wrong. I'm wondering if there isn't a way to make still include the Italian heritage, but not have that contradiction, I guess. Any of the rest of y'all could chime in and help me out.
So, Mayor Cahill, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam President. Thanks, Ms. Visnick. Have we engaged with, well, let me pull that back. I think we all know that there's a certain amount of pride that the Italian American community has long felt in Columbus Day. So that's and it's torturous to try to word this, right? That's what you're just trying to get to. So I don't. We haven't discussed this prior to tonight. I'm not sure where to go with it. Initially I look and I think, adding Indigenous Peoples Day to the day affords people their opportunity to look at the day in one context or another. But what you say is, what you say is also troubling. So,
And I should say, I think it's wonderful that we're adding Indigenous people. So, adding that part of the clause. I just wanted to discuss this potential renaming.
Dr. McKenzie, did I see a hand?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I would agree that we probably have a juxtaposition that feels uncomfortable, but I don't know that this evening in this setting is going to be enough to unpack all of that. So I'm happy to just have them be juxtaposed and continue the community conversation, and hopefully the Beverly Human Rights Committee will help us to do that in a more fleshed out way so that we could be sensitive to all of the parties in the conversation.
Follow myself. I appreciate those sentiments immensely. I think whenever we can be more inclusive and add to and provide the space for the conversations to continue. I went to UNH, University of New Hampshire, and we actually would get up at 4 a.m. and call it Leif Erikson Day to recognize other explorers and other contributions to just the history of our planet. I value, Ms. Visnick, your identifying and naming what you see to be that juxtaposition. And I think for this evening, and knowing that there is pending legislation going on and that there's going to be additional community conversations, I think I'd like to, I don't necessarily want to move the question because I think there's some other aspects of version 2 that maybe want to have some discussion, but I think I would be supportive of leaving Columbus Day for now with the / recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day as well.
I'm fine with that. We can move on to the next color.
Okay. Sure.
There's just one clarification I want to make because I'm noticing it and I think it's confusing. So assuming that September 6th is primary day, then September 7th is a Wednesday, that would be the grades 1 through 12 classes resume. That would move down to the 7th, and kindergarten preschool start date would now be the 8th. That's over in the corner in yellow, and I just want to make sure everyone realizes that. So just so you see that actually goes down another line.
Oh, okay. I had
just wanted to be
that.
sure that you and everyone else, and so when we get a final version, Donna will make sure she'll pull that off and move it around, and it will look lined up a little better. But I just want to make sure everyone was clear on that.
Okay, so for Mayor Cahill, which color would you like to discuss? Well, I was going to say, do we want to discuss the recommendation to have September 6th, if it is a primary day, be a no school day?
Sure.
Mayor Cahill.
Thanks. That's why I was asking if it was going to be a no school day regardless. I think given that's a state primary in a year where there's going to be an open gubernatorial race and now an open attorney general's race, I think it's going to be a more heavily trafficked day for voting than some others. And I don't have any confidence that we can effectively have school and the election with that kind of a turnout expected. So I'm all in favor of whatever primary day lands on being a no school day.
Right. And I would just echo what Dr. Churchick said, especially if it's that early in September. We don't have the routines. We don't even necessarily know all the kids' names in our classrooms because the faces have
Still
been
trying to get them on
obscured by
buses.
masks for 2 years. Yes, okay. Any more discussion on having primary day off, whether it's the 6th or a date that we have to adjust the calendar to?
Yes, for yellow.
Yeah, yes, for yellow. Okay. Just taking it in order, the additional early release days, are there any questions or discussion? Mayor Cahill.
Yes. I'm sensing that it's desirous to vote tonight. It's problematic not to.
It's within the timeline. That's typically because
Yeah.
the community
Well,
especially for this is the time frame largely because our parents and families are looking to know what are those dates and what are those times.
So if I could, then I apologize that I was not able to be at the Curriculum Instruction Student Life meeting where Dr. Flaherty presented on time on learning. If you'd bear with me. I wonder if we might ask her to do the elevator version of, or just a summary of what she said at that setting to help understand how we meet our time on learning and still incorporate these additional early releases.
Sure. Okay, I can give you the balcony review. The high school, once we, the way that it works is anything that is considered instructional time counts towards that time on learning. Anything that is passing time, early release time, delayed start time, that all has to be deducted off of our total time in school. And that's how you come up with your time on learning. It has to be instructional core time. And so when we do that for the high school, they have to have a minimum of 990 hours. And when we deduct off the things that will not count towards that, they are right at 990 hours. So they do not have flexibility to increase any early release time or delayed start time with their schedule, but it's kind of built in already because they have their time off for final exam, midterm exams, and they have several delayed starts for MCAS testing. The middle school has the most flexibility, and they have considerable amount of time because we will classify them as an elementary school, which means they only need to have 900 hours. And I don't have it in front of me off the top of my head. I believe they were around the 960, right around in that. So they had plenty of time. The elementary school had about 13 to 15 hours available. However, that will even be a little bit more flexible next year. This year, because of delayed enrolling starts and elongated dismissals for COVID procedures, they have a little bit reduced time, which they won't have next year. And so that flexibility will actually increase. So we have plenty of flexibility at both the elementary and the middle school to add the 2 additional days.
Can I follow up then a bit? Thank you, Dr. Flaherty. The categorization of the middle school as elementary, I heard you. I'm just trying to understand, and I understand practically how that allows for the additional early release. Could somebody speak to that educationally, why that's where we should go with that?
It's when the school committee would have to vote annually for that. And so they when you're in a middle school, because it's not attached, it's not a 7 through 12 school. The middle school is its own entity, but there are only 2 choices. We can classify it as an elementary school, or we can classify it as a secondary school. We tend to look at our continuum as K-8, and then the high school. And it also changes the amount of minimum hours that are required from 990 to 900. So you'll see historically, it was not built to meet a secondary schedule because they would be significantly below the 990 hours that would be required. So it has historically been classified or thought of as a K-8 continuum, which means that their hours would be minimum of 900 and they are significantly above that.
Thank you. And I guess as a follow-up to that, maybe the word historically is a helpful one in terms of me understanding, and anybody else who might have a question, what has been historically our number of instructional hours that kind of range at the middle school level? Is that 960 consistent historically?
So we have not changed we have not changed the schedules at all.
Okay.
That those are the start times and the end times have stayed the same. Sometimes the passing time, we may have allowed for 5 minutes of passing time. Now they're only allowing for 3 minutes of passing time. It just depends on the number of transitions, the layout of the building, what needs to happen, how many transitions happen during a day.
Fair enough.
That sort of thing. So typically, that's where we go. As another point of reference, the decision and the vote about whether you are categorizing as an elementary or a high school, it has always been built into the program of studies. So when the program of studies is approved, that's when that decision has been made. And so Dr. Flaherty will be more clear on that when we bring the program of studies forward this year and show you where it is. But that's where that vote has taken place annually for our school committee. And I'm not so sure that had happened in last year in the pandemic time. I don't remember the presentation of program of studies, but typically it's all been embedded in that same vote of program of studies.
Thank you, Dr. Chotrick. And this may, hopefully, maybe last question. Could you speak briefly to the professional development component that'll go into those afternoons?
So these afternoons will be building based, and they will be largely collaborative time for teachers, but principals will design whatever opportunities are needed. As you can notice that the majority of the days are on a Wednesday. I did that because they then align with staff meeting days, so that if you were going to begin at 1 and you add the staff meeting on, you now have a period of time that you can enter into in more depth some either professional development or collaborative work or digging into data or doing some of the things, and planning whatever the time is built.
And what are the total number of minutes of PD that'll be taking place?
We're increasing 4 hours. This would be a 4-hour increase at all K through 12, K through 8, because it's at noon to 2 on the Wednesdays on the 2 additional days. So we're adding 4 extra hours.
Over 5 days?
Nope. We're adding 2. We already have 3 days. We already have. Typically, we build 3 days into the calendar already. We are adding 2 additional early release days.
We're only adding 2 additional?
Yes.
But
the
okay,
others were
I'm just
already
confused by the color code then.
Well, the 2. So typically we had 5. The teal blue, the November one, that's not a professional development. That one is
Day before
that's the day
Thanksgiving.
before Thanksgiving. And then May 26th, I think that one was left there because that is has always been an early release day. That would actually continue to be one. And the 4 days that we already had built into the schedule were the one that's in December, the one that's in January, and the one that's in March. So if you look at this year's calendar, those would have just been rolled the same, those were already built in. So we're just adding 2 additional early release days.
And that's the September, October?
Correct.
And they're 2 hours each. Okay.
Correct.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, both of you.
Sure. Are there any other questions about adding 2 additional early release days in the September, October as indicated?
Madam President?
Yes, Dr. Silva.
Just a quick question. Could you tell me how many hours historically there have been for professional development?
So we have, there's 2 ways of looking at it. So let me walk you through. We have, in our contract, we have 23 days beyond the school, 23 hours beyond the school day that was in the previous contract, in which time we had 185 days. In this last contract, we converted 6 hours to make that 28 hours of beyond the school day, and we have 184 days. I don't know if that makes sense to you. And then typically at the K to 8, we've had these 4 early release days, which is an additional 8 hours. And so the total 37 hours, if I'm doing the math in my head very quickly. And we're just increasing that by 4 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think the last item in this version would be the December 23rd being a no school day.
That's just pushing the calendar all. That's not really a change in the number of days or anything like that. It's just saying.
Mike?
That would not change the number of days students attend at school, the number of days teachers attend, the number of days paras attend. It really just pushes the end date out 1 day, and we have that 1 free day before the Christmas Eve holiday.
And it keeps the Tuesday half day from being a lone half day where attendance could be an
Well,
issue.
depending on snow days, that doesn't.
That's
We
true.
don't know that anyway. So that could have been pushed by a snow day anyway.
Do we have more comments, questions? We have a motion on the table from Ms. Bisnick to use this version 2 as recommended by the administration.
I just want to make a comment that although I understand the time on learning, I understand that the high school is already up against their time on learning barrier. Kind of like my juxtaposition with the Indigenous Peoples Day. It feels wrong to say K through 8, you get extra time to do what you need to do, and 9 through 12, you quote unquote don't. And I understand that you're saying they have it already because of delayed MCAS and because like today, midterms, finals, whatever we call it, they get out early. But those things already existed on their calendar, right? So K to 8 is getting a calendar change to the benefit of those teachers, and 9 through 12 isn't. So I understand we can't do anything about it. I just want to acknowledge that that's out there. It feels wrong. That's all.
Mayor Cahill.
I guess I was just thinking as you were saying that, Mrs. Visnick, one other situation that might be somewhat comparable was when we added a prep period at the elementary level that hadn't been in a prior contract, right? I mean, does that sound comparable in any way?
In that they aren't equal to begin with. So if everybody had already been at the same number all the time, that would be one thing, but they've never been equal. They have 84 minutes of prep period a day versus 45 minutes of prep period a day. Because the schedules are completely different, that there wasn't an equal amount of time to begin with. So whether or not you think this is a correction or however you want to look at it, they didn't begin the same, so making a change to one doesn't make it unfair to not make a change to the other. I guess that's how I would say.
Can you fit a triple negative in that sentence?
Okay, so we have this proposed calendar version 2. There's a motion and a second on the table. We've had some discussion. Are there any more points of discussion or clarifications needed? The way that the calendar is written, it has Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day. It has the primary day as September 6th, and that we will hear more and adjust that if necessary in September once we know the primary day. It has 2 additional early release days on September 21st and October 19th for the elementary middle schools. It has us closed December 23rd, the Friday before the winter break. And it has us ending our school year with no snow days on Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. Ms. Quayla, did I see a question or comment?
Yes. So for Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, if we do keep both of them on there, is there any entertainment in reversing them so it's Indigenous People / Columbus Day 2nd? As someone who comes from a mixed family where my dad was a feisty Italian and my mom was a 3rd Native American, this is something that's been discussed in my house for years. So if we keep both the names, like just reverse them.
Would you like to make that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so we have on the table an amendment to just reverse the order for Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day for the October 10th holiday. Is there a second for the amendment?
Sure.
Okay, Ms. Visnick. So we'll deal with the amendment vote first. Is there any discussion before we take a vote on the amendment? Ms. Visnick.
I have a question in the sense of what happens if the state passes their legislation? Then does our calendar name just change?
I would say in the next cycle, when we do a calendar next year, if you choose to abide by the state change. So the real challenge, too, is that the federal holiday is still called Columbus Day, even though President Biden made the proclamation that we recognize Indigenous People Day. The federal holiday is still Columbus Day. So the contracts, that's a technical, very small technical problem. I'm sure that we can address it, but all of our contracts say that people have Columbus Day off. So in terms of naming, I think that's a school committee decision, what you want to have on your calendar. I think anybody could, have me bring it back to the agenda to have that conversation and discussion again. I'm just, I don't know. There's so many areas that are impacting by it.
Dr. McKenzie.
Yeah, I hate to be a naysayer. I'm usually a big rah-rah person for these kind of changes, but I'm going to stick to my earlier position that I think it requires more conversation, and I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves in what we want to do with renaming, switching names, or how we want to show appreciation for that acknowledgement. So I'm inclined to just leave it the way it is until we have more information and we have more conversation.
Okay. If there's no more conversation, we can have a vote first on the amendment, and then we'll have the main motion. Those who are interested to have the October 10th, 2022 holiday represented as Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day, vote yes. That's 3. Those opposed? That's 4. The amendment has failed. Now the main motion is to have it as represented in the spreadsheet version 2, as shown on the screen. Is there any more conversation? Seeing none, all those in favor of this version of the proposed calendar to be our school committee calendar for FY23? I see 7 to 0. Okay, thank you. It took a little bit longer than I had expected, but I know that there are people watching specifically to know these dates. So thank you, parents and guardians at home. We'll get a cleaned version of this up on the district website, and then again, if the primary day is announced as anything other, we'll revisit that at our next meeting. Okay, Dr. Trocek.
In the draft that we're going to present on the website, we're not going to include September 6th. We're going to take it off the calendar, assuming that it's primary day, just so that you know. And then if in fact it isn't we'll list it as primary day, no school. And then if we have to make a change later, I just want to be clear how she's going to list that on the calendar. Okay.
Mayor Cahill.
If people are going to make the mistake of believing that that's certain and make vacation plans that they can't reverse, maybe in the meantime you need to leave it conditional.
We'll keep it highlighted and conditional, but it's going to be all right. I just wanted to give Donna some guidance as to how to reflect that on the calendar that we're putting on the website for people to read. So that's great. Thank you. I'll do that.
Okay, and thank you so much for your patience. We're now at your agenda items, Dr. Trocek.
Right. Thank you. So, I know. So I'm going to ask you to stop share so I can share my. And, all righty. So we've already completed the overnight field trip. Let me just go back. So the items that I have on my, that doesn't look the same as I knew it, but we have the overnight field trip. I have an update for you on the COVID updates, and part of it being the testing program update, and then also some information on the FY23 budget process. So Jody Elder is, I think, on the call with me still, if she's still there. We've done some work updating some information for you, and I am going to rely on her if you have questions around any of the particulars, or particularly as we go through the COVID updates and the testing program. This is the update as of January 20th. Some of these are the same updates that I typically share with all of you. This is the overall City of Beverly in the age ranges for school-age students. Right now in Beverly, as of the 20th, we have on 5 to 11-year-olds 67% and fully vaccinated 56%. Our 12 to 15s 89% with one dose and 81% fully vaccinated, and 16 to 19-year-olds 60% and 56%. This is the COVID dashboard that we present and we keep updated on our website. We're going to come back to this a little bit later in the presentation, but this is the current active cases for as of January 25th. Again, this is we typically have been doing a Tuesday and Friday update for the past 2 weeks. We missed the Friday because of the snow day for 1 week, and then Ms. Elder was out on the second day, so we had full weeks, but this is representing from Friday to Tuesday. Teresa Kirsch keeps me up to date from our local Board of Health on the 7-day data for Beverly. As you can see, we, like most of the other communities, had our surge hit its sort of a peak between January 2nd and January 8th with a very high average daily incidence rate. We have since, in the last 2 weeks, gone back down to below the holiday week break, so that was kind of interesting to me in terms of our incidence rate. So that's just for your information. And as I promised you at the last school committee meeting, we have a breakdown per grade level of our vaccination rates for Beverly. So in our K through 4, you can see fully vaccinated. Our numbers are pretty close to 50%, which is good given the amount of time that we've had. We are continuing to work, and we continue to encourage our families to consider the vaccination as, you know, one of our best mitigation strategies. And you can see the numbers who have had at least 1 dose. In our grades 5 through 8, here are the numbers for fully vaccinated and the numbers with at least 1 dose. And at the high school in grades 9 through 12, fully vaccinated and those with at least 1 dose. So our numbers have been increasing every time I've presented this to you. I think that's good news. We will be talking in a couple of minutes, too, about boosters. We did not include booster data, but we are collecting booster data, so knowing how many students not only are considered fully vaccinated, but also have received a booster. And we'll begin to incorporate that data as we go forward.
Two quick questions.
Yep.
I think you've said this in prior meetings. The difference in this reporting, these are the actual students in our classrooms.
Yes, thank you.
Versus the aggregate data from the state is people.
Correct, thank you. This is information, we utilize 2 data sources for this, the MIIS data and the SNAP data, which is the school system for health records. So we have to sort of mine that data out of each of those sources and combine them together. Katie Tobine is the one that has done all the work for us on this, so we appreciate her work on this. But yes, this represents students that are sitting in our chairs.
Okay, and just on that booster point of view, the data will always come from these systems, and we don't need parents to.
Yeah, we have not
report
asked
or
anyone to
email or
submit anything
Okay,
from the student end, yes.
Ms. Bisnick.
So when we look at the bigger aggregated data in our 12 to 15 age range was 89% for at least 1 and 81% for fully vaccinated. But then we look at this data and we don't even see a number in the 70s for that age range. Is our theory that all those, the difference in the percentage, those children are homeschooled or private schooled?
We've avoided theorizing at this point.
There has to be an explanation for the fact that when we say 12 to 15 is 89%, I mean, that's a huge number, right?
Right.
89% has at least 1 shot. There's nothing anywhere near that number on that screen.
Karen?
Right?
I think we should also look, I think we look at 12 to 15 as that center, but it's really
Thank you.
7, 8, 9, and 10.
Sure, but
And it is, I'm just saying it's creeping a little higher.
okay, fair.
Mayor Cahill.
And similarly, when you look at the 16 to 19s, there's a real disconnect in the different ways that the data is collected. So our 16 to 19s would include our 11th and 12th graders, right? 16 through 18, and then some college age. We haven't been able to tease that out and figure out where that's disconnected.
Jody?
We have not been able to tease it out. I think as I'm listening to this information that you're all noting has been consistent since we have started reporting. It hasn't changed. We sort of fall below in our 12 to 15, and then we look like we're sort of a little bit ahead in the older age group. And I don't have an explanation for that. I don't know why.
But we are confident in these numbers that come from MIIS and SNAP.
1,000% confident about the data for the students who sit in our seats.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that brings me to testing programs, and Jody and I are going to hopefully offer you an explanation and a more detailed explanation for those who are watching or will watch later. As you know, I sent an email out to staff and to parents over the weekend. The Department of Ed has, in conjunction with DPH, has made a recommendation to, or an opportunity for districts to shift their approach in testing. And so this is what we used to have. This is our old prior testing protocols. We had a program for test and stay. Test and stay was a initiative for asymptomatic individuals and confirmed close contacts that we would allow the opportunity to test students in the morning and remain in school if they were identified as a close contact. However, there were some shortcomings, and Mayor Cahill, you were one to point that out often. We were only testing unvaccinated students because our vaccinated students were exempt. Students that had had COVID in the last 90 days were exempt. Students riding on a bus were exempt. So we had a lot of exemptions, and they were not included in the test and stay program. And so that is what that component of the testing program was. We always have had symptomatic testing, and those were tests for students that present with symptoms in school. And the symptomatic testing is something that we've been doing throughout the whole process. The proposal and the new testing program that we were offered is now really designed to optimize the in-person learning. The first caveat is that we will be continuing with symptomatic testing. That will continue on if someone's at school and they present with symptoms. If we have consent from parents, we will test them in the health offices and get immediate information as to their status. What we are shifting to, and what will be different, is that we'll be participating in an at-home antigen testing program. This program begins on February 7th. And this allows us to distribute test kits to every staff member and every student that opts in. Whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you can participate. And so I think that's a really important piece. It broadens the amount of people who we can test. It gives us better opportunity to have a wider reach for that. And because of that, it would eliminate the need for test and stay. And it also eliminates contact tracing. So those are the two areas that we can discontinue, areas that are taking an enormous amount of time and energy from our health professionals in the schools, and are really not giving us the yield that this opportunity will give us in terms of identifying positive cases. The essence is that every Tuesday, we'll be distributing test kits. On one Tuesday, we'll send them home with staff, and they will get a box. It will have 2 kits in it. The box will go home with staff members, and they will opt in and say they'll use one on Wednesday, and then they'll hold on to the other one and use it the following Wednesday. The next Tuesday, we'll distribute kits to students. They will take their box home. They will use 1 kit on Wednesday and 1 kit the following Wednesday, so that everybody, we're sort of doing this surveillance testing, and we continue that distribution so that each week on Wednesdays, staff and students will be giving themselves an at-home test, those that opt in. And so we'll have some opportunity for people to kind of have that surveillance. Yes.
And so I did receive your email, and there was an opt-in. And so it's optional, but
correct. It's an opt-in. You have to opt in order to get the kit. You don't have to. It's voluntary. If you choose not to participate, you just do nothing, and that's
but there
okay.
is an action for parents who want to have the kits come home with their kids on Tuesdays, and then the idea is that Wednesday before school,
or at night, either way. But
either way.
On Wednesday, we're targeting Wednesday as the test day, that you will administer that at-home test. And you'll get a reading, positive or negative. Only positive results are reported, and there is a form in which to report those positive results. You do not need to report a negative test. You just only need to report if it's a positive test.
And it's a confidential reporting into the district.
It's a report that goes directly to the nurse's office, confidential, all of those things.
Thank you.
So this program runs from January 31st, although we're not implementing it until December. It runs from January 31st to April 22nd. We are starting it on February 7th. We did that purposefully because given the distribution history, we weren't sure we were going to have all the kits on time, and wisely, they actually arrived very late today. So we will be sending kits home on Tuesday with staff, and then the following Tuesday with families.
I think I saw a couple of hands. Ms. Robinson first.
So, what are some of the, I don't want to say positive and negative, but what are some of the good things about this? And when you heard this, what are some of the things you may have been a little concerned about?
Great. The positive is the opportunity is to be able to offer a testing to all of our students instead of just those that are unvaccinated. I think we all have learned through this recent surge that even some of our vaccinated students have been identified as contracting COVID, and so this gives us the opportunity for everybody to participate and have that. I believe that having the opportunity to have that access to those test kits at home is a real positive. Being able to do it at home, I think for some families, that's a positive. To not, in some other scenarios, pool testing, so to speak, or whatever, students are having their noses swabbed at school and having to report to different rooms to do this. This is done in the privacy of your own home. And I think the fact that it's voluntary and that you opt in is really, positive. So we're not forcing anyone to do anything that they don't want to do. But this is just another layer, another mitigation strategy for you and your family at home. Some of the challenges we're still working through is the distribution process of the students, of the kits to students. So we have, at this point in time, we had about 1,200 families that had opted in. And so that distribution process of those kits at the building level to make sure we get the kits home. And I think just making people aware of the expectation of that Wednesday testing to make sure that people understand what they're being asked to do and how they need to do it. Jody, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to echo what you said in terms of getting the kits into the hands of all of our families, not necessarily from a vaccine versus non-vaccinated standpoint, but specifically from an equity standpoint. We were fielding a lot of questions in the health office over the last several weeks about access to kits. They're expensive. They have been hard to find over the last couple of weeks coming out of the holiday break. And I think we've worked really hard in terms of being able to get this information out to our families. We've talked about translating it, having paper copies for families that don't have computer access, and really working hard to reach all of our families and get testing kits into those families who want and need them. I think that's it.
Will we know how many people opted in?
I will. Yeah, I can report. I mean, right now I can tell you. I know we're at about 1,200 families. That's an estimate number. We do know that because we have to know, because we have to distribute the kits. So yes, that's information. Someone else asked me about that, and there's no reason. I can always let everyone know what percentage of people are opting in. How many families and staff.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, Dr. Juracek, it's not a one and done. You can sort of opt in over time. If it's something you decide to do and you miss the email or the deadline of this Friday, you can certainly opt in next week and begin on the 2-week shipment following that date.
So yeah, let me just clarify that. We are asking, and we will be sending another email out tomorrow reminding families that Friday at noon is the deadline for opting in for the following week. But you can opt in after that. It's just that we have to place our orders and know how many kits we would order before the close of business on Friday for the week following. So you can opt in after that, and we'll adjust our numbers. We adjust our numbers weekly, and so we're able to kind of work that way.
Which is good because a lot of people have, I know personally we have a few kits at home available, so it wouldn't be a good idea to opt in this week.
Right. But the program runs through April 22nd, and so you can opt in at any time. You can also opt out at any time if you feel like it's something you don't want to do anymore. So,
Ms. Visnick, I saw your hand.
Can Ms. Elder or you speak to why this eliminates the need to do contact tracing?
Mm-hmm.
Because I would think that if I'm sitting next to somebody, for 84 minutes at the high school and that child tests positive, then I probably want to make sure I do my testing, right? So why are we not doing contact tracing anymore?
So Jody, I'll throw it over to you in a minute. I will just say that a lot of the data that shows that the minimal amount of transmission in schools the yield of contact tracing. The results from Test and Stay have shown that really that has not been an area of concern. But Jody, do you want to talk? I know we talked a little bit about the research that it was based on.
Yeah, we learned a little bit about this, Ms. Visnick, at our first webinar, and it was a question and a concern I think that a lot of people had. And if you recall, when Test and Stay was initiated, it was really a way to keep close contacts in schools. We weren't excluding students from school. And we've talked about this. It's a lot of work to do this, not just in the Beverly School District, but across the state. And the data was looked at for the 4.5 months that the state collected the data from September till December, and more than 98% of the Test and Stay or the close contact testing was negative. So it was thought that the amount of work that was involved, the missed class time, although less than days off, it was not trivial when you're looking at testing at 30 and 40 kids in a morning of school. It was thought that it was not something that should be continued for the low number of positives that it was catching, if that starts to answer your question, Ms. Wisnick.
I also think it's important to note that Test and Stay was only testing the students that we identified that we did not have students that were contacts outside of school. And if you are a close contact outside of school, you're still going to be asked to follow the local Board of Health and CDC requirements. So if you are exposed and are a contact outside of school, then either you're exempt because you're vaccinated and you're all set to come back to school, or you would have to follow the quarantine procedures. Correct, Jody?
Correct.
All right.
Oh, Mayor Cahill.
Thanks, Madam President. So does that suggest, Dr. Chirocek and Mrs. Elder, that close contacts outside of school, there will be a capacity for some contact tracing that hasn't existed recently?
It will only be whatever contact tracing is happening outside of school already.
Well, I'm not following that.
So if you are at a sleepover on a Saturday night and the person whose home you are at tests positive and it's reported to the Board of Health that there's a positive case, then you will be contacted by the Board of Health to say you're a close contact, and then you'll have to identify whether or not you're exempt and able to come to school or if you are required to quarantine.
So given that the Board of Health was overwhelmed as soon as the case count went up, the health department, and the school nurses got overwhelmed pretty quickly too. I mean, when things were surging, right? Mm-hmm. And now that there's no contact tracing that's going to be being done by school nurses, will the school nurses be able to help with that outside of school contact tracing?
We have not been doing outside of school contact tracing to date at all. And I don't know the answer to that.
Right, but because you've had to do all the in-school contact tracing. See what I mean?
So the idea of this program is that if you're enrolled in it, you're having a weekly surveillance test on your own at home. And that is the whole idea, is so that we can alleviate and allow our nurses to provide health care instead of doing some of the other work that they've been having to do around the Test and Stay and the contact tracing. That's my understanding. I can't speak beyond that. I think we'd have to.
No, we can spend some time on it. I mean, I can talk with the public health nurse. We can look into it some. But I'm going with your example. Sleep over on the weekend. Later, one of the children tests positive. There are kids in school. It happens outside of school.
But we don't contact trace that right now, I don't believe. Jody, do we?
We don't know. And I think Mayor Cahill, there's an important distinction to make. Dr. Chorchik and I talked about this earlier. So I think, and I don't want to speak out of turn, and I don't want to speak for the Board of Health, but I speak with those nurses almost daily. And we're seeing there's a change in the number of tests that are reported to the Board of Health. If you recall, the only way that the Board of Health learns about a case is if the sample is collected in a supervised fashion, whether that be a PCR test or a rapid antigen test that is done at an urgent care or somewhere like that. With all of these, with the availability of more home tests, those tests that are conducted in people's living rooms, kitchen tables, wherever they're done, are not reported to the Board of Health. So, you know, in this specific scenario of a sleepover, if a family takes their child to get a PCR test and that is the way the Board of Health is engaged, then the contact tracing would occur in that, you know, formal and organized fashion. If not, then it, you know, it depends on the honor system, if you will, which is really what we've been relying on with families for the last several weeks with this new programming and with the at-home test being acceptable. So if there was a sleepover, the parent would have to talk to the other families, and that's how people would learn about this.
Right. Can I thank you? Can I ask this language on this slide? Did we generate this? Did this come from the state with the program, with the new program?
The language meaning the bullets as to,
Yeah,
that
the
comes
bullets.
right out of the memo, yeah.
Okay, so that only positive results reported to schools / boards of health.
Mm-hmm.
Positive results of these unsupervised home antigen tests? Because that would run counter to be different than what you just said, Mrs. Elder, had been happening to date. You know what I mean?
So some public health nurses across the state or Board of Health, some school nurses across the state actually work for local boards of health. So they're considered public health nurses. That's just, we're separate in Beverly, but that's not the case across the Commonwealth. Perhaps that's why it's written that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for trying to walk us through all this. Thanks.
So is the recommendation, if you do test positive, to then have a PCR test done so
No.
that you do enter into that? No?
I believe that if you test, we are accepting at-home tests, parent report of at-home tests. We are not requiring a PCR confirmation. Correct, Jody?
That's correct. And I think, you know, certainly during the surge, even the PCR sites were overwhelmed as well. So if you're positive with a home antigen test, you're considered positive, and we're not recommending that you have a PCR test. You can if you want, but we're not recommending or requiring.
Ms. Robinson.
So will we still keep a dashboard, or?
That was great. Thank you for asking. I think that's my next slide. So I'm going to move to the next slide. We will continue to have the dashboard. However, it's our suggestion that we're going to update it weekly rather than twice a week on Fridays, because the testing day is Wednesday. We'll do that update on Friday. And again, the other difference would be that we would be discontinuing contact tracing for exposure that happens within the school buildings.
Ms. Bisnick.
So if we as a school system are accepting the positive at-home tests, that means we're going to say, all right, you as a child are allowed to stay home and you're allowed to stream into your classroom. But is the Board of Health accepting that as a positive test, or is the school system then turning that positive over to the Board of Health?
Jody?
There is open communication between the school health offices and the Board of Health. The home tests are not reported into the state system, the State Board of Health system. The home tests that are reported to the schools are not only reported on our weekly dashboard, but they are reported to DESE as well. So they're counted. They're just counted in two different spots.
And neither of those two spots is the Board of Health, and therefore the Board of Health isn't going to go do contact tracing.
The Board of Health is not doing contact tracing on students in school.
We're having a little nuance here, because if we go back to what the mayor was trying to explain, the sleepover over the weekend, on Monday I'm a student or Tuesday, whatever is our testing day, Wednesday I test positive. Maybe I did my test earlier because I felt terrible earlier in the week, and I know I was with those other children at my sleepover. The issue really is the quote unquote contact tracing up to those families, or will the Board of Health actually get involved?
So that's not a change. That's not a change from what we're doing. That's how things are now. That's how it has been for the last 4 weeks. So at-home tests have not been recorded, and that is whether we've been doing test and stay or whether we do the at-home rapid test program. That's not a change. So we are accepting at-home tests from teachers. We are accepting at-home tests from students. We are not requiring PCRs. We have not been requiring PCRs, and so that's how it. Whether it's a exposure outside of school or inside of school, if a parent calls and said, I did an at-home test and my kid is positive, we document it. And the only way we have been doing contact tracing is if they say, they were with these 4 kids at lunch, or, so we look at school exposures, but not at out-of-school exposures. And we don't follow up on out-of-school exposures, out-of-school
We don't pass
contacts.
our positive tests to the Board of Health so that they could do contact tracing.
Jody, did you hear that question? No, we don't.
I did hear that question, and the answer to the question is no, we do not.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I saw Dr. McKenzie's hand and Mayor Cahill.
Thank you. I hope this question is easy to follow as I try to walk through a scenario I'm familiar with. So after someone has had COVID, in many higher ed institutions and some schools, the children are then exempt from any kind of pool testing or PCR testing because the antibodies will show up for a while. So what I want to just be clear about as I update parents is that once you have the positive test, what we're relying on for return to school is the quarantine period, not a negative follow-up test, right?
And I'll let Jody.
You're correct.
Yes.
Yep,
and
you're correct, Dr. McKenzie.
And the quarantine period is 5 days. After the 5th day, you can return on the 6th day if your symptoms are improving and you're fever-free. But you are still required to wear a mask, which we are wearing masks all day anyway, but you are still required, and it's recommended you wear the mask indoors for the remainder of the quarantine time.
Thank you.
Mayor Cahill?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Madam President. 2 things. One, I just want to say, and I understand how it happens all the time. Just for our clarification, our Board of Health is a 3-member volunteer board. Our health department are our staff. We have a health director. We have 2 full-time health inspectors. We have 1 full-time public health nurse. Prior to COVID, that was the department. We're typical of small cities and towns, and I think COVID has highlighted a lot of things that probably need to change about how public health is structured and handled and delivered all over. We hired several part-time public health nurses temporarily during COVID, several because each of them had other full-time jobs and are working, a small number of hours each. We hired one who's been dedicated to the schools this whole time. And we were funding those several and the one with CARES funding, and now that it's after December 31 of last year, we're using ARPA funds for that. So I'm going to touch base with our team at the health department, maybe follow up a little bit, because I just want to understand how we might find a way to fill that gap that Mrs. Visick and I are asking about, those kids that have an exposure outside of school, and we want to figure out how to know about them and contact trace if that's possible. So I'll look into that a little bit more, but I appreciate, like I said, you were offered something, we were offered something by the state, the test and stay, and we've used it, and it did what it did well. It had gaps in it, and now they're offering something different that we're using, and I appreciate the effort to try to put it together and roll it out. So thanks.
Thank you. All right. Last thing, vaccination clinic. We have a vaccination clinic on Friday. We attempted to get it to be a booster clinic. They are not willing to open it as a booster clinic. It is a second dose only for anyone that received their first dose 3 weeks ago. They will come back for their second dose at that time. We have, however, been working with two other providers, and we have secured, and I got the information after my presentation was done. We've secured, and I don't know if we've confirmed, but what we were working on is a booster clinic in school, at the middle school and at the high school during the school day, so that students can opt in to get a booster at school during the school day. We think that will help us reach a number of people who have not been able to come or not. So Jody's been working with one of the providers that we've used before, and we've actually just identified a second provider who might be able to do something like that. So we're going to be setting those up in the coming weeks. So,
Ms. Visnick?
How is it going to work for the children who have to have, what's the age level where they're supposed to have their parent with them?
So we would not offer, first of all, they're not eligible for boosters yet because it's the 5 to 11 age group, and they just became eligible for the original round. And so these are boosters only for 12 to 18. And they don't need parents there. They need parent permission. They need the consent form filled out, but they don't have to have a parent there for it. That's why we chose the middle school and the high school for those that are eligible.
Thank you.
Ms. Robinson?
This has been a question that I've heard a lot. I don't know the answer to this, so I'm going to ask Ms. Elder. So if somebody has had COVID, when should they get a booster? If they've had it, is there a certain amount of time?
I don't know the answer to that question, Ms. Robinson, off the top of my head, and I don't want to give misinformation. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'd have to look it up, and I can get back to you.
Okay. And just one other thing. I just think that the past 3 weeks have been the hardest ever on nurses. So thanks to you and all the staff.
No, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Dr. McKenzie.
Hi there. I'm not a nurse, but I do have some information about vaccines and boosters after COVID. So there is the possibility that after having COVID, you can be vaccinated too soon after COVID. There are people getting all sorts of fancy blood analyses, but based on the data I've read, you could have such a high number of antibodies that it's essentially not adding much to your protection to get it very soon. The documentation I've seen indicates that the reason you don't really have to do the PCR testing for several months afterwards is because it will present as positive because those antibodies are so high. So I would suggest talking to pediatricians about when the child has had COVID, because it could be that the booster could essentially really be too soon and then require more, or just not give the added protection unless you wait enough time. So, so there is, and the Board of Health also requested, waiting at least 21 days at minimum. So there's definitely a wait period. So you're right that it's not just like you got over COVID and you can get a booster right away. So I think it is important to check with pediatricians, but there is the sense that there is a high level of antibodies soon after.
Okay, just noticing the time and knowing that we have energy efficient lighting that will go off soon.
At 10 o'clock. All right.
Want to move along?
So please, if anyone has any further questions, feel free to just reach out to me. I'm happy to answer, talk to you on the phone call. Jody is available as well to any of you if you have questions about any of it as it comes along. But I would encourage anyone that's listening to opt in. Our opt-in form is listed on the website on our COVID page, so it's easily accessible, and it's in many languages. So if you have any questions about that, you can look on the website. So, all right. So my last item that I have is the information on the budget process, where we are right now, and more information coming forward. I did forward Monday, I believe, some of these slides to you, just so that you would have the opportunity to take a look at them as you could go. We were trying to get them out sooner, but Jean and I were working on them still through Monday. So I just wanted to share them with you to just give you a quick update of where we are, and then have a conversation a little bit about priorities for the 23 budget as we build our FY23 budget. Where did it go? Oh, sorry. It's a link. What'd you think? How'd I do? Sorry. So
Here's the budget.
I just want to remind you that we always start our budget conversations with our goals, and making sure whenever we build our budget, what we're building our budget is to represent what we have identified as our goals. These are our goal areas that we have identified for the school within our district improvement plan, in our district improvement planning process. There are factors that impact the FY23 budget. They're a little different than previous years. The good news is our contractual obligations are finite. We know what they are. We've resolved all of our negotiations with all of our units, so we're very confident in those numbers as to what those obligations will be. We consider enrollment and staffing, and any changes in enrollment that are impacted that we would need to add staffing to. We are this year, in addition to other things, thinking about resourcing for accelerated learning. We've talked a lot in our meetings about accelerated learning and the need to make sure that we're addressing some of the gaps that students may have from the past 2 years, but also an eye on the standards for where we're going, so that we're kind of optimizing instruction for students. We consider department funding requests, and this year, as you all are very well aware, we have the added consideration of having multiple sources of funding, which is a wonderful thing and a wonderful opportunity for us. But also, I will continue to remind the committee that one of our biggest challenges is to make sure that we maintain at minimum level serviced, if not an appropriated budget, so that we don't have a cliff in FY25 when this extra funding goes away. So here's where we are in the process. I've met individually with each of you and talked to you about your priorities, collaborated with principals in central office around a shared framework, assessed the enrollments and the impact that it'll have on staffing. We're in the process right now of identifying those administrative efficiencies and restructuring opportunities, especially in light of the additional funding that's available. We're reviewing requests for funding from various departments, and we're collaborating with the city to determine the proposed city contributions. Today, it happens every year. I think it's happened every year. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I'm going to give the budget process presentation, and I say, well, the governor's budget will be out soon. He releases his budget. So we got information at 3 o'clock, have not had an opportunity to absorb and discuss that even amongst ourselves, but it gives us, I'll show you later, we have an interesting, always interesting when the governor's budget comes out. So this is just the calendar. We are right now at January 26th having a committee of the whole meeting with the budget discussion. This is our calendar plan. So before I talk about the priorities for FY23, I wanted to spend some time reminding all of you what are those funding sources that we have available from FY22 through FY24, and giving you a mid-cycle update, at least for this year, as to how we have expended some of those funds, so that you know as we go in what we've been doing, and I think it will inform our discussion around the priorities as you try to sort of give me that final guidance towards what you want us to concentrate on in that FY23 budget. Briefly, the FY22 appropriated budget was $65,376,407. The Student Opportunity Act, which is really a wild card right now. I don't know if you remember, 2 years ago, we did our Student Opportunity Act plan, assuming we would have about $700,000 in Student Opportunity Act funding. It didn't get funded that year. The following year, when it did get funded, Beverly was only funded at $30 per pupil, and so that was $141,000, which is included in that appropriated number. And so that's just a moving target. And in today's press conference, the governor announced an increase. It's reflected in what his proposed budget is for Chapter 70 funding. But I cannot at this point in time tell you how much of that is Student Opportunity Act, or if it even is an increase for Beverly in Student Opportunity Act, whether it's enrollment driven. So that's the area that I need to find more information out from all of you. For all of you. We do know that we had ESSER funding at $555,939. That has been obligated, and you'll see where and how, and will be expended as of June 30th of 22. We have ESSER 2 funding at $2,119,947. To date, we have obligated and/or will be expending by June 30th $1,624,644 of that money. Again, that's a 2-year grant. We do not have to spend all of that until the end of June 30th, 2023. Jean, you can correct me at any time if I misspeak. And then finally, ESSER funding. We are receiving $4,741,978. That grant, while we anticipate any day now having that approval finalized and getting the paperwork back from them, is still under review at Grants Management. So that money we have not tapped into, although we have plans and ideas, and we will come forward to the committee throughout this budget process as we, once we hear that it's been approved. I'm just reminding you, these are last year's priorities. These are the priorities that you identified through our process last year. You had asked that we concentrate on social, emotional, mental health, thinking about, do we need social workers? Do we need outreach counselors? Do we need more school adjustment counselors? Do we need program support staff? You asked us to concentrate on curriculum, teaching, and learning, taking a look at aligning equity within our curriculum, professional development for staff around equity and around curriculum, as well as curriculum supports. And then finally, operational. And under operational, you asked us to think about transportation, human resources, and the diversification of our workforce, as well as we knew that at the time we were in contractual negotiations with many of our unions, which have all now been resolved. I'm going back to the Student Opportunity Act just to remind you, because embedded in the Student Opportunity Act work that we did, if you remember, we held stakeholder forums. We met with a lot of different people in a lot of different groups, took a lot of input from the community as to what areas they would like to see the district concentrate on, as well as there are certain commitments under the Student Opportunity Act that we have to kind of keep in mind. Intentional focus on student subgroups, adopting, deepening, or continuing specific evidence-based program in the area of curriculum, monitoring our success, utilizing data, and making sure we're looking at disparities in achievement, and then finally, in family engagement, engaging families that represent our subgroups. So when we submitted our plan, we submitted this plan in, I want to say, January of 2020. It was prior to the pandemic, I know that. This was when we thought at the time it would be around $700,000 based upon initial information that we received. These were areas that we identified and that we had hoped that we would be able to utilize our Student Opportunity Act funding for. We wanted to look at aligning curriculum. We knew we needed to add more support for our English language learners. We knew that we wanted a director of curriculum for the area of STEM. We wanted some curriculum materials. We thought about $60,000. We wanted to expand our access to the tech, including the After Dark program, and that would involve some tuitions for Essex Tech. We wanted to increase personnel and support holistic needs, including the Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equity. This is where we first sort of envisioned that position. We wanted to add an academic teacher to the Beacon program at the high school to support students particularly vulnerable returning from hospitalizations. And we wanted to expand high-quality early education. This was prior to our final decision about, this was part of the formula to eliminate that kindergarten fee. So these are all the ideas that we had. I just wanted to remind you where we were. So what did we do and how did we do it? And this is sort of just a mid-cycle review based upon the focus areas and priorities that you all identified in FY22. So in the end, what we received for the Student Opportunity Act funding was $141,000 in SOA funds. That's $30 per student. The funds that are issued are part of Chapter 70 funds. It's not a separate line item. So in that $10,590,914 are included our Student Opportunity Act funding. So how did we utilize that funding? We were, I don't know if you remember, but Essex Tech was able to secure a grant for $90,000. So that left our obligation to them in that first year of $30,000. So we had that money available. We did hire our director of STEM for curriculum at the high school, Jennifer Thomas, and she's awesome, and we're very happy to have her aboard. We also concentrated on dual enrollment, which is something that we had talked about. Many of our dual enrollment opportunities are free. We have a great partnership with North Shore Community College, 5 or 6 courses that are being offered right now to students. We have one course in particular that's specific to our English learners. That's a dual enrollment program through North Shore. And we also have one course that we're offering through Endicott, and that is the Intro to Human Services. That's going to be offered second semester. It has enrollment opportunities for up to 30 students, and that's on Wednesday evenings at Beverly High School. So that is sort of where that $141,000 were obligated. But we certainly didn't want to say, oh, well, we only got 141, that's all we're going to do. And remember, we had all of these priorities that we were hoping to address through our last process. So I'm going to just break down each one and how we sort of addressed it. That first priority of social, emotional, and mental health, if you remember, those were those positions that we had talked about. We were able in this past year to increase. We increased by 1 outreach counselor. We increased by 2.5 school adjustment counselors. We added 2 program support teachers, 1 at the high school, 1 at the middle school. We've increased our nursing staff by 2 positions. We've added a guidance staff at the middle school. And finally, we added the Director of College and Career Readiness. That's Julie Ferrara's position to help really in that whole idea of opportunity and access. Under curriculum and teaching, again, that's the aligning of equity, professional development, and curriculum supports. So under aligning equity, we've engaged in a curriculum review. We've had a curriculum adoption, K to 12. We have the ZERN program, K to 5, and Reveal, 6 to 12. We are in the midst of the adoption process for ELA, grades K to 8. We have Learn Zillion and the Wit and Wisdom pilot that have already begun in our elementary schools, and grades 5 through 8 engaged in their first meetings this past week to think about what that adoption process for those grade levels will look like. Professional development, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just some of the professional development that we've been able to offer. We've done a lot of work at the high school on the development of pathways. That's led by Julie Ferrara, but have a number of teachers that are involved in that process. We've provided equity training on advanced placement courses through the college placement people. Sorry, I don't know the name of the group. We've provided Orton Gillingham training to our reading teachers and special education teachers at the elementary level. We've provided ZERN PD and Reveal PD for the implementation of our new math curriculum. We've engaged in Empower Your Educator through Resilience. We have training and among many other opportunities that we've had. Those were just a few. We've added curriculum supports. So we added 7 elementary teachers, classroom level teachers. We've added a grade 7 teacher to expand, and we did that in the area of math so that we reduced the class sizes in math in grade 7. We added a director of English learner. We've added an English language learner teacher at the Cove School, a director of humanities at the high school, a math science coach at the middle school, paraprofessionals, 7 positions. I will say they're not all filled, but we did add the positions and advertised for them. We've added 3.6 reading teachers. We've added an elementary special education teacher. We've added 2 building academic support teachers. Those are, Jean refers to them as subs, but they are sort of floating academic teachers in the middle school that can cover classrooms, but also are available to provide academic supports. And we added an additional fellow at the elementary. In terms of the priority for operational, in terms of transportation, we added 8 bus monitors to our transportation department. We were able to procure the software BusRight to allow us to, and it's been actually at a crucial time when we have to collapse routes or when we have to track buses and find out where they are or find out where they're running or what time they're arriving. It gives us a great opportunity for that, and we are ordering cameras for the buses so that we will have cameras on all of our buses. In terms of human resources, we have a group of teachers and administrators that are participating in a teacher diversification PLC through the Department of Ed. Between Mrs. Brown and Dr. Morgan, we are working on reviewing hiring practices and providing training to the administrators and to anyone who is sitting on the committees that does the hiring for us. And then finally, we have been working to develop pathways for recruiting diverse staff, not only recruiting, but also advancement opportunities, para to teacher pathway. And we've been actually working with some of the surrounding communities that already have some of these programs. So, and then finally, we did settle all of those contracts, and so our contractual obligations were addressed. So the question is, how did we do all of that? That sounds like a lot. It certainly wasn't the $141,000 that we got in SOA, but what I wanted to do is give you just a little breakdown as to how we utilize some of the funding that we have so that you have a good idea. So our ESSER 1 funding, that $555,939, we utilize that for the Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equity, School Adjustment Counselor, 1.5 of the positions that we added, the support salaries, bus monitors, a data technician, and a fellow. Stipends, that was the accelerated learning program. Some of that money went to summer programming and after-school programming that we utilized. Fringe benefits, whenever we add salaried positions, we have to add the health insurance and the MTRS. We used some of it for supplies and materials to support our remote learning, instructional supply technology, and disinfectant for the PPE. And then other costs, a small amount went to the transportation for the accelerated learning program. That money is obligated. It's gone. It will, as of June 30th, our last payment will go out, and we will have utilized that whole grant. Then comes ESSER 2. Remember, if you remember, we had $2.1 million in ESSER 2, and I told you that $1.6 million of it approximately has been obligated. This is how we have done that. Those 7 elementary classroom teachers were funded through ESSER 2, a teacher of ELL at Cove, the elementary special education teacher, grade 7 math teacher, director of English learners, outreach counselor, the math science coach, reading teachers, and nurses were all included on that ESSER 2. We also use some of it for our support staff expenditures. So 2 professionals at North Beverly are included in that. Our hall monitors that we added at the middle school and the building support staff that we added at the middle school are all part of that. And then the various other lines in the budget include stipend expenditures, fringe benefits, contracted services, supplies, and transportation. So that is all funding that we have. That's how we are using some of these supplemental funds that we have. And then that brings us to the priorities. So I guess I felt like it was really important for you to have a good understanding of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and where we're kind of finding, how we're kind of balancing the different funding sources that are available to us. And that brings us sort of to the priorities for FY23. And I had the opportunity to meet with most of you and have conversations with you around the certain things that you were interested in making sure that we were, that we were concentrating our efforts in building the budget on. And these are the areas that I came up with. So to each of you, there was a conversation around social, emotional, and mental health. In particular, a lot of conversation was around trauma and stress that our students, it's been 2 years. None of us expected this long, prolonged pandemic scenario to keep going on and on. And in particular, under that, some of the areas that you all raised were either after the bell activities, what are we doing, what are we offering, how are we making sure that it's accessible for everyone, increasing counseling with our outside partners and taking a look at what we're able to do to provide supports, wraparound services, tools for teachers to support that trauma-sensitive classroom. That was that training that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then mental health services, either allowing for the opportunity for students to access some of that mental health by either increasing staffing or increasing partnerships with people who come in to provide those services. Under the curriculum and teaching, I think we pretty much had a lot of the same ideas and thoughts. We had conversations about increasing those pathways at the high school and opportunities for, relevant, authentic experiences for kids, creating partnerships within the community for mentors, looking for opportunities for professional development to help teachers grow. There's been a lot of talk in the last few weeks about substitute teachers, so I wanted to make sure I included that on the list. Under operational, transportation was something that everyone was interested in making sure we were addressing one way or the other, whether it's increasing access for transportation, in one way or another, and then not changing our focus on human resources, continuing that work that we're doing on diversification of our workforce. And then finally, and I think I made it a point to make sure that I address this with everyone because I have heard from you over the last few months questions about communication. So in particular, I was kind of curious, what did you mean by communication, right? What communication, what is the areas that we need to improve upon or grow upon? Again, more information, wanting more information and accessibility for information for families around after-school activities, leveraging our digital resources to expand our family engagement access. One of the things that we did learn over the pandemic was that when parent forums or parent conferences or school events were available virtually, we had a broader access of a broader range of participants. We had a lot more families that were able to join in that way. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and just because we can do something in person, eliminate those opportunities for digital access. Effective ways to share out school committee communication. I had conversations with a couple of members. At the highlight of the pandemic, we had 700-800 people watching our school committee meetings. Not so much anymore, always anyway. And so, is there a need for a way to push out the information that school committees considering and understanding and making sure that information is available to everybody? Some mentioned standard expectations for pushing out information from schools. So the conversation that you might get one form of communication from one school and a different form of communication or a different quantity of communications from schools. So is there a standard expectation? And then finally, parent-teacher communication around parent-teacher conferences. So this is the information that I sort of have synthesized from the community conversations, the PTO presidents I had a forum with, the union. I met with the union and listened to what some of the teachers were thinking. I met with all of you. I'm asking, I guess, is there things that are missing from this list? Are there things you would like me to think about differently? Do you want to clarify anything? Is there anything more that I'm missing?
Dr. Silva.
I have a question about the ESSER funds, and can you speak to a little bit about, just to remind us in terms of how we need to be careful with those funds?
Yeah.
In terms of, where we direct those funds so that towards the end, when that dries out, that we're not in a bad position?
Yeah, so this is the case with any grants, and there's always a lot of conversation and discussion that you don't want to put resources on a grant that are instrumental or imperative to the functioning of the schools, right? And we certainly prior to having all of these supplemental funding sources available to us, had a balancing act even with our entitlement grants. But we would always create an appropriated budget that was at minimum level serviced or reflected the level service and any of the new opportunities that we were trying to infuse. That sometimes means looking in, is there something that we don't do in replace of something new? But we always want to make sure that if these ESSER grants never existed, we could successfully and effectively and efficiently run our schools. And so the challenge is, with this influx of funding, how do we do that? And so keeping our eye on making sure that as we identify and add positions, we know we're making evaluations. Is this something that needs to be moved into the appropriated budget after a period of time? For many of the positions that were described here, particularly here, in some of the curriculum supports, the principals requested them with the idea that that would only be for a short period of time. So, for example, elementary classroom teachers, because of the because we had kindergartners and first graders in our buildings who had and second graders who had never had a normal year of school, their emphasis was on some really small class sizes in those grade levels. So they said, I want an extra first grade teacher so that I have 16 kids in a classroom or 17 kids in a classroom, knowing that that's not where we're going to live in terms of class sizes in Beverly, right? Eventually, we're going back to 21 and 22, which is the typical class size. But they could add that teacher, and then they would know that they would be able to eliminate that later. However, some of the positions, we are going to absorb into the budget. We need to figure out where we're going to do that, whether they're going to go into alternate grant sources or they're going to be part of the appropriated budget. And so those are the evaluations that we're doing.
So of the positions that you listed, what fraction of those are temporary?
That's a great question. Fractions, huh? I don't do fractions, no. I would say, in my world, what I would like to see, I would say that I would hope at least 40% of them remain. That would be, in my mind, and yet I want you to know that we're identifying, we're able to utilize this funding, we're finding new ways to do things, and that will provide efficiencies that will mean that there will be some things that we won't need that we may have always just had in the appropriated budget. So this is just this great opportunity to rethink what we do and how we do it and how we're utilizing our resources. So, and already of the positions that we created for this year in our meetings, I would say there were at least 5 or 6 that people just said, yeah, that didn't work as well as I hoped it would. I'm going to try something different next year, and here's my different thing that I'm going to try next year. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want me to keep going? Sure. I can finish what I have. I just have a few more slides, and then we can do, I think, let me get back to, so this is just sort of as a reminder. In our contractual obligations, these are definite numbers. Last year and the year before, we did not have the luxury of knowing that these were the numbers that we would be operating under. But we do know that our cost of living increases are going to be $1,075,751. We know that our steps are going to be $639,185. Our lanes, we've been utilizing that 180 as a benchmark, and it has worked for us. We'll continue to watch that, but we believe, I think Jean has strong confidence in that number. And at this point in time, after consulting with Bryant, we are utilizing a 3% increase in healthcare as sort of a holding point. That number can change based upon if we get different information from the city at another time. But that we typically, at this point in the budget process, feel like a 3% increase in healthcare is a safe number for us to think about. And this slide has slightly changed a little. Well, last year our city contribution was $54,785,483. Our Chapter 70 funding was $10,599,414 for a final budget appropriation of $65,376,407. And hot off the press, Again, our FY22 Chapter 70 funding last year was $10,599,14. The governor's budget, which came out at 3 o'clock this afternoon, lists Beverly at $13,158,441. That's a substantial increase in Chapter 70 funding. I have not peeled apart what that means, where it's coming from, but I will tell you, I did watch the governor's press conference this afternoon, and he did give a nod to the fact that there was a huge increase for Student Opportunity Act. So I'm going to go check that out and find out, is Beverly still considered a minimum aid? I don't really know. And that's going to, again, it just came out this afternoon, so I haven't had the opportunity. In terms of the legislative process, in April, we'll hear from House Ways and Means. Sometime in May, we'll hear from the Senate, and then we'll know that final Chapter 70 number in June of 22. And so now questions or comments, or if you want to go back to the, I know it's getting late, the priority list, if it was there things that you saw that I might have overlooked, or anybody that wants to comment on any of that.
Timing wise, would we be able to individually give you feedback before
Absolutely.
our
Would
February
love that.
9th regular meeting, and we
Yeah.
could perhaps have more time for discussion with any additional information that we might want to request from Dr. Turchek? Does that sound reasonable? Yeah? Okay. So our takeaway this evening, our homework, so to speak, would be to think about what's been presented, any additional ideas or information that we might need to have the conversation at our February 9th meeting. Okay?
So February 9th or February, I think it would be the usually at the, we have the budget discussions at the Committee of the Whole. I'm happy to push it up.
Oh, okay.
And do
Yeah.
it at every meeting, but typically I think, oh, Jean's not back there. We had laid out a calendar to have a budget discussion on a monthly basis.
On a
so-
monthly basis, okay.
Yeah.
So our second February meeting.
Which I think is the
16th.
16th.
Because of the
Because of the
vacation week.
February vacation.
Okay. Gives us a little bit more time, but if we want Dr. Turchek or any of the administrative team to do any homework as well, get it sooner rather than later.
And please, seriously, if you have any questions about, that was a lot of information. If you want to go over, if you have questions about how ESSER works or how it doesn't work, or what does that look like, or please set up a time, phone conversation, Zoom call, in person. I'm happy to sit and talk with anybody that has questions about that.
Dr. Silva?
In terms of the mental health support, how do you see the funding spilling over into extracurricular type activities, sports, clubs, those types of things outside of the classroom, where kids can socialize and sort of get more of what they've been missing that could address those concerns?
So we, in terms of fun, I mean, we actually are open to ideas and thoughts and questions. I know at each building, there's a different sort of structure as to how you set up an opportunity after school. I do think that we've had a lot of conversations about, and I spent some time speaking particularly with Jody Elder too, around what mental health services could look like. We are bringing in a group called City Connects, which is out of BC. They're coming in to kind of just have a conversation and discussion with us about how we're structuring some of that. Our extracurriculars are funded right now through the appropriated budget. That doesn't mean they couldn't be, but we certainly wouldn't, we certainly, there's not a lack of extracurricular because funding is not available.
Has funding increased in extracurricular activities?
It has. We've continued to work on it. In particular, funding for extracurricular is really about the stipend for the person who runs the program at this point in time. Beyond that, there's not really a big cost. At the middle school level, we've been having conversations. Lisa's working really hard to put together a new structure for intramurals, for example, right? And she's working with a committee of teachers, and what would that look like, and how can we make that more accessible? Betty we have a structure for proposing clubs, for proposing, opportunities for some of that. We actually have a pretty robust program of extracurriculars that are available to people, but I don't.
Has the enrollment in sports declined over over the past?
I don't know. I know that that's typically something that you guys look at F&F, and I don't know that you've done that in terms of the actual enrollments.
Oh, we only look at it for the sports, right? Or,
That's
well,
what
we
he
used
just
to
asked.
do it for band, but we don't do it for like intramurals.
Right.
I'm also asking for in terms of sports.
Yeah, he just asked about sports. That's why he said. I didn't know if have you had Dan, has Dan come in and looked at numbers at all for any of the sports?
Not yet this year.
Yeah.
Okay, just in the interest of time, we're about to lose our lights. And so these are great questions. Maybe we can get a list of questions to Dr. Churchak.
Send them in and I'll be happy to try to address them.
Upcoming meetings and dates, as we've mentioned, February 9th is our CISL meeting. I wanted to call attention, we have our Student Advisory Council at 6 p.m. For those who aren't on CISL and won't be here, we will have the hybrid option. It's not broadcast on BevCam, but we will have the platform available if you want to join at 6 remotely and then come at 7:30 for our regular school committee meeting. Just wanted to make sure that option's available. It's always great to hear directly from our students, and I always appreciate how they've had the opportunity to speak with Principal Taylor in advance of meeting with us to talk about how they've, brought different topics to solution even before they bring the topic to us. So those are always great. Student Advisory Council happens every other month at 6 p.m. And then, as we mentioned, the 16th will be our next Finance and Facilities and Committee of the Whole. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Visnick. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. All those in favor? There we go. Thank you so much, BevCam, and thank you everyone watching at home. Have a good evening.